The officers never asked her name. They saw the plain uniform, the quiet face, the way she stood near the wall like she was trying not to take up space. And they made their decision in under 30 seconds. Sergeant Dale Rourke poured the coffee slowly, deliberately, watching it soak through her collar and down her back while his crew laughed like it was the funniest thing they'd seen all month. She didn't flinch, didn't raise her voice, just turned and looked at him with eyes that had seen things his career would never prepare him for. None of them knew they were looking at their new commanding officer, before you find out what happens next. If you've ever watched someone get underestimated and then prove every single person wrong, this story is for you. Follow along to the end. Like this video and drop a comment telling me the city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Maya Solis didn't sleep the night before. She lay on the bed in her rented room 3 blocks from the Drayfield Police Department's 9th District and stared at the ceiling with her hands folded across her chest, the way she used to sleep in the field when there was no mattress, no roof, just a tarp, and the sound of helicopters somewhere in the middle distance. Old habits, some things you carry out of one life and into the next without realizing you've packed them. She wasn't nervous. That distinction mattered to her. She'd stopped being nervous about things she could control somewhere around her second deployment, when she'd learned that nerves were just the body's way of processing incomplete information. What she felt instead was something closer to focus, a narrowing, like a lens adjusting before a photograph. At 4:15 in the morning, she got up, made instant coffee from the tin she'd brought with her, and sat at the small table by the window, going over the file. Deputy Chief Warren Briggs had given her 2 weeks ago. 43 pages. 2 internal complaints dismissed without investigation. 1 officer resigned under pressure and later sued the department. Case settled, term sealed. A use of force incident in which a suspect's medical records mysteriously went missing before the hearing. And at the center of all of it, consistent as a heartbeat, one name, Sergeant Dale Rourke. Rourke had been with the 9th District for 11 years. He had commendations on the wall and a reputation as someone who knew how to manage difficult personalities, which was department language for something considerably darker. 3 supervisors had come and gone during his tenure. One requested a transfer 6 weeks into the job, another retired early. The third, a woman named Captain Denise Farrow, had submitted a formal misconduct report and been placed on administrative leave within the month, her complaint buried so efficiently that it took a federal audit to even confirm it had ever existed. Briggs had showed Maya the audit results over coffee at a diner 40 miles outside Drayfield because he didn't trust his own office. "You understand what I'm asking you to walk into," he'd said. It wasn't a question. "I've walked into worse," Maya said. "That's exactly why I'm asking you, and not someone else." She'd spent 9 years as a combat medical officer before transitioning into law enforcement administration. She'd commanded a forward surgical unit in 2 conflict zones and run crisis response operations in environments where the rules changed without warning and the people around you weren't always who they said they were. She knew how systems broke down. She knew how people behaved when they believed they weren't being watched. And more importantly, she knew that the only way to understand a broken institution was to enter it without announcing what you were there to do. That was why she was going in as a nurse, not a nurse. A contracted medical services coordinator, technically, which was a real position the department had recently created as part of a wellness initiative that nobody in the 9th District had asked for or wanted. Her credentials were genuine. Her cover wasn't exactly a lie. But the uniform, the plain navy scrubs, the lanyard with the contractor ID, was specifically designed to make her look like someone who didn't belong in a police station and knew it. She needed to see how they behaved with someone they thought had no power. At 6:45, she drove to the station and sat in her car for 11 minutes. She watched officers arrive, the ones who came early, the ones who came late, the way some of them moved through the door with their chests out, and others with their shoulders already hunched. She was building a picture. It was something her old training instructor had called baseline mapping, understanding what normal looked like before you started identifying deviations. The baseline here looked tired and territorial. She got out of the car, adjusted her lanyard, and walked in. The lobby had the smell of old coffee and floor wax, and something faintly chemical underneath both. A desk officer looked up when she entered, assessed her in about half a second, and looked back down. Help you? Maya Solis, medical services contractor. I was told to check in with the district coordinator. The officer pointed without looking up. Second floor, ask for Linda at the desk. Elevator's broken, stairs are through the door on your left. Thank you. She took the stairs. On the second floor, she found a bullpen that held maybe 20 officers in various states of morning arrival. Some at desks, some standing in clusters. A few still in jackets like they hadn't fully committed to being here yet. The space was loud with overlapping conversations. Nobody looked at her. She found the coordinator's desk, introduced herself, and spent 6 minutes completing paperwork. Linda, late 50s, reading glasses on a beaded chain, the careful neutrality of someone who'd learned not to notice too much, walked her through the wellness suite, which was a repurposed break room with 2 folding tables, a blood pressure cuff, and a rack of pamphlets about stress management that had never been touched. Officers can come in voluntarily, Linda said, in a tone that suggested none of them would. The department wants us to log any who do. Understood, Maya said. I'll be here. Linda left. Maya set up her materials, made a note on her clipboard, and waited. The first 40 minutes were quiet. A young officer came in with a headache and let her take his blood pressure, then left looking slightly embarrassed. An administrative staffer stopped in to grab a pamphlet, then put it back when she thought Maya wasn't watching. Maya was watching. She was always watching. The trouble started when the morning briefing ended and the bullpen refilled. She heard Rourke before she saw him. His voice had that particular quality of someone who'd learned that volume was a form of authority. He was talking to 2 officers near the copy machine, and he was talking loud enough to make sure the room heard him without appearing to address the room. Maya had met men like him in every institution she'd ever worked in. They were a type. She'd learned to recognize them the way you learn to recognize a certain kind of weather. Somebody tell me what the wellness ferry looks like, he said. Because I heard we got one. Laughter from the 2 officers near him. A few others in the room glanced toward the wellness suite. Maya kept her eyes on her clipboard. Rourke appeared in the doorway a moment later. He was built like someone who'd played football in college, and decided that gave him permanent permission to occupy more physical space than he actually needed. Mid-40s, thick through the shoulders, with a jaw that led his face like a statement of intent. He looked at Maya the way you look at something that's gotten into your kitchen from outside. You're the medical lady, he said. Medical services coordinator, Maya said. Maya Solis. Sure. He leaned against the doorframe. What's a nurse doing in a police station? The department wanted a wellness presence on site. This is the program. He looked around the room like he was sharing a joke with an invisible audience. We doing stress balls and deep breathing now? That the plan? Blood pressure checks, health screenings, voluntary counseling referrals, Maya said. She kept her voice steady and her expression neutral, which she knew would irritate him. Men like Rourke needed a reaction. The absence of one was its own provocation. If there's something specific you'd like from the program, I'm here. I'm good, he said. Then, where'd you train? University of Hardcastle, graduate degree, Mercy Regional for clinical. He absorbed this like it was mildly disappointing. Too straightforward to find fault with. You ex-military? You gotta look. I've been in a few places, Maya said. He looked at her for a moment longer than was comfortable, then pushed off the doorframe and walked back into the bullpen. She heard him say something to the officers near the copy machine that she couldn't fully make out, but she caught enough. Contractor, babysitter, somebody's idea of a good time. And then more laughter. She wrote down the time, wrote down his name, wrote down the names of the 2 officers who laughed. She had been in the building for 1 hour and 23 minutes. Over the next 3 days, she moved through the station like furniture. She arrived early, left late, and spent the hours in between watching everything. Officers stopped noticing her the way they stopped noticing the coffee machine. She was just part of the room. That was exactly where she needed to be. She listened to how supervisors spoke to junior officers in the hallway. She noticed which officers avoided certain desks and which ones clustered near Rourke's corner of the bullpen like moths around a not entirely safe light source. She watched who filed paperwork carefully and who didn't bother. She noted which officers went quiet when certain conversations started. She built a map. On the 4th day, Officer Priya Mehta came into the wellness suite during lunch and sat down without saying why. She was young, maybe 26, with the tight, controlled posture of someone who'd learned to make herself small. Maya let the silence breathe for a moment and then asked if she was having trouble sleeping. How'd you know? Priya asked. You've got the eyes, Maya said. It's not an insult. Lots of people on shift work deal with it. Priya looked at her hands. It's not just the shift. Maya waited. There's stuff here, Priya said finally. I don't know how to... I can't really talk about it. You don't have to, Maya said. I'm just here if you need to. Priya left 10 minutes later without saying anything more, but she came back the next morning with coffee, 2 cups, one of which she handed to Maya without making a thing of it. Maya accepted it without making a thing of it either. That was how you did it. You created a space where people could exist without performing. On the 5th day, Rourke decided he was done being patient. Maya was crossing the bullpen toward the stairwell when it happened. She had her clipboard in one arm and her bag over her shoulder, and she was thinking about the records she needed to pull from the department's HR system, records that Briggs had quietly granted her access to under a different clearance code, separate from her contractor identity. She was thinking about timing and sequencing and how much longer she needed before she had enough. She wasn't thinking about Rourke. He stepped in front of her from the side, which meant she saw him too late to change her trajectory. He was holding a coffee cup. She registered this detail approximately 1 second before it stopped mattering. Oops, he said, and poured it on her. Not a spill. Not an accident. He tipped the cup at an angle and let the coffee, still hot enough to sting, run down the back of her neck and soak into the collar of her scrubs and spread across her shoulders. The sound it made was small. The room, which had been full of noise, went briefly, nastily quiet. Maya didn't move. The hot liquid was running down her spine, and she was standing in the middle of the Drayfield Police Department's 9th District bullpen, with coffee soaking through her uniform and approximately 15 officers watching to see what she would do. She felt the heat, registered the sensation, and then consciously set it aside the way she'd set aside pain in the field when there was work to do. She turned to face Rourke. He was grinning, not a smirk, a full, deliberate grin, the kind designed to communicate that he knew exactly what he'd done and he had calculated exactly what the consequences would be, which was to say, none. Sorry about that, he said, in a voice that meant the opposite. Badge number, Maya said. The room went still again, differently. What? Rourke said. Your badge number, Maya said. I'd like it for my report. Rourke looked at the officers around him and made a face that invited them to share his amusement. Several of them obliged. Report, he repeated. You're going to file a report on me. I'm going to document the incident, yes, Maya said. Badge number. Lady, you're a contractor, Rourke said, his voice dropping into something quieter and more deliberate. You don't file reports on officers. You don't file anything on officers. You're here to hand out stress balls and remind us to drink water. That's your whole job. You understand that? Badge number, Maya said again. His jaw tightened. He gave her the number. She could tell from his tone that he expected it to be meaningless, that he expected nothing to come of it, that he had done this kind of thing before, and nothing had come of it then either. She wrote it down on her clipboard in front of him. Then she walked to the bathroom, cleaned herself up as best she could with paper towels, went back to the wellness suite, and wrote down everything that had happened with timestamps and the names of every officer she could identify who had witnessed it. Her hands were completely steady. That evening, in her rented room, she pulled out a separate phone and sent a single message to Warren Briggs. Stage 1 complete. Initiating access to restricted files starting tomorrow. I need 48 hours. Briggs responded in 4 minutes. Granted. Be careful. Maya looked at that last part. Be careful. And set the phone face down on the table. She already knew what she was walking into. She'd known since the audit file. What she hadn't known, what she couldn't have predicted from paper records, was the texture of it, the way the corruption in the 9th District lived in the air of the place, the way it moved through rooms like weather, the way it had taught people to make themselves invisible as a survival strategy. That part you had to see. That part you could only understand by being inside it. The next 48 hours were going to require precision. She opened her laptop and began. The department's HR records were accessible through the clearance code Briggs had provided, and she worked through them carefully, building the timeline she needed. 3 misconduct complaints against Rourke, all dismissed. 2 against a corporal named Sean Tarrant, dismissed. A formal inquiry into a pattern of targeting female officers, closed without findings. The paper trail was there, if you knew what you were looking at. Someone had tried to file these things into irrelevance rather than destroy them, which was either arrogance or negligence, and probably both. She also found, buried in a facilities maintenance log from 8 months ago, a work order for the department's internal surveillance cameras that had been filed and then canceled. The cancellation note was terse. Equipment assessed, no action required. The cameras covering the internal bullpen area were listed in the original assessment as malfunctioning. A follow-up inspection had been scheduled and then quietly never conducted. The cameras that covered the area where Rourke had poured coffee on her head had been out of service for 8 months. Maya sat back in her chair and looked at the ceiling. That wasn't an accident. Equipment malfunctions. Cancellations happen. But you did not assess surveillance cameras in a police station bullpen and declined to repair them without making a deliberate calculation about what those cameras might record and whether you wanted a record of it. Someone in the department's administrative structure had looked at those cameras and decided they were more useful broken. She needed to know who had filed that assessment. She cross-referenced the maintenance logs with the department's personnel directory and found the name Property and Facilities Coordinator, Gwen McCready. She was a civilian employee who had been with the department for 6 years. She had no disciplinary record. She had twice applied for promotion and been passed over. Maya wrote the name down and circled it. On the 7th day, everything accelerated. She was crossing the lobby at 8:15 when Rourke came through the main door with 2 of his officers, Tarrant and a younger one named Doss. And they were already in the middle of something, some conversation that had started outside, some joke with a current running under it. She moved to go around them. "There she is," Rourke said, and the way he said it made her stop. He wasn't looking at her exactly. He was looking past her, at the desk officer, at the lobby in general, performing for an audience that consisted of anyone who happened to be present. 7 days, he said. "You know what the record is? For contractors leaving before their assignment ends?" He looked at her then. 11 days. Somebody set that record 3 years ago. You're almost there." Tarrant and Doss laughed. Maya looked at Rourke steadily. "I'm not going anywhere, Sergeant." "Sure you're not," Rourke said. "You're dedicated. We appreciate that." He said the word dedicated the way you'd say the word delusional. Then he walked past her toward the elevators, which were apparently working again, and she watched him go and noted the ease of it, the complete confidence, and understood that he had done this so many times and faced so little consequence that he had lost the ability to imagine a version of events in which this ended differently. That, she thought, was the most useful thing she'd learned all week. She went upstairs, she went to the wellness suite. She sat at her folding table, opened her laptop, and sent a carefully worded secure message to Briggs. "I need a federal contact, specifically someone from oversight with authority to access sealed personnel records without triggering internal flags." Timeline is compressing. She had 6 more things to verify before she had enough to move. She wanted to move within the week. Briggs's response came back 2 hours later with a name and a phone number. Special Investigator Nadia Castillo, Office of Law Enforcement Oversight. "She's expecting your call. She doesn't get surprised easy." Maya read the message twice, then closed the laptop and went to find Gwen McCready. The facilities coordinator had her desk in a narrow office on the building's ground floor, wedged between a storage room and the building manager's suite. She was somewhere in her mid-40s, with the look of someone who had learned to occupy as little professional space as possible. Efficient movements, careful organization, a desk that was immaculate in the way of someone who had been taught that disorder was a personal failing. She looked up when Maya appeared in her doorway, and something shifted in her expression. Not fear, exactly, but a careful readjustment. "I'm Maya," Maya said. "Medical services. I've been upstairs all week. We haven't officially met." "Gwen," she said, "can I ask you something off the record? Not about anything official, just a building question." Maya kept her voice easy, conversational. "The cameras in the second-floor bullpen, they've been out for a while, right? I noticed they were dark." Gwen looked at her for a moment. 8 months, she said. "That's a long time for a repair ticket to sit." "It is," Gwen said. Her voice was carefully neutral. "Was it a budget thing?" Maya asked. Gwen looked back at her desk. She straightened a folder that didn't need straightening. "No," she said. "It wasn't a budget thing." Maya waited. "I filed the work order," Gwen said, still not looking up. 6 weeks after I filed it, I was told the equipment had been assessed and no repair was needed. I didn't file that second note. I don't know who did. When I tried to follow up, I was told the issue had been resolved at the supervisory level. She paused. I stopped asking after that. Why? Maya asked. Gwen finally looked up. Her expression was direct, which surprised Maya a little. Because I have a job I need to keep, she said. And I've been here long enough to understand what resolved at the supervisory level means in this building. They looked at each other for a moment. Thank you, Maya said. She went back upstairs. She called Nadia Castillo from the stairwell using her personal phone, speaking quietly but not whispering, because whispering was conspicuous. Castillo picked up on the second ring. Castillo. This is Maya Solis. Warren Briggs gave me your number. I know who you are, Castillo said. Her voice was dry and measured. He gave me your dossier last week. Combat medic, 2 tours, crisis administration. You're undercover in a police district. What do you need? Sealed personnel files, Maya said. Specifically the Denise Farrow case, the captain who filed misconduct and got placed on leave. Her complaint was buried. I need to know what it actually said. A brief silence. That's going to take a subpoena. How long? 48 to 72 hours if I push it. What's your timeline? I need to move by the end of this week, Maya said. Things are escalating on the ground. Define escalating, Castillo said. The sergeant I'm investigating assaulted me in front of 15 witnesses on day 5, Maya said. He's been escalating his behavior since then, which tells me he's either testing whether I'll report it or he's decided I'm not a threat worth worrying about. Either way, he's going to get bolder, and I need the Farrow file before that happens. Another silence, longer this time. I'll file the subpoena today, Castillo said. You'll have it in 48 hours. And Solis? Yes. When you make your move, make it clean. These cases fall apart at the edges. I know, Maya said. She hung up and stood in the stairwell for a moment, listening to the sounds of the station around her. Footsteps above, voices below, the mechanical hum of the building doing its business around her. She could feel the shape of what was coming, the way you felt a storm before the barometric pressure changed. She had enough pieces. She needed 2 more. She needed the Farrow file. And she needed Officer Priya Mehta to decide whether she was ready to say out loud what Maya had been watching her try to say for the last week. That afternoon, Priya came to the wellness suite again. This time she sat down and didn't bother pretending it was about sleep. I've seen things, she said. Her voice was low and she was watching the door. In this district, things that didn't get reported. I wanted to report them, but I was told by someone I trusted that if I filed anything, I would end up like the last person who filed something, which was... She stopped. Which was Captain Farrow, Maya said quietly. Priya looked at her sharply. How do you know about her? I've been doing my homework, Maya said. What happened to Farrow happened because she didn't have enough support before she filed. That's not going to be your situation if you decide to speak. What does that mean? Priya asked. You're a contractor. You hand out pamphlets. I do, Maya said. That's what I'm here for. Priya looked at her for a long moment, searching her face for something. Whatever she was looking for, she seemed to find enough of it, because she said, if I told you what I know, and I'm not saying I'm going to, but if I did, what happens to it? It goes where it needs to go, Maya said, and you'd be protected in the process. How can you guarantee that? I can't guarantee anything, Maya said. Nobody can. But I can tell you that the people I'm working with have the authority to make the protection real rather than just a promise. Priya sat with that. The room was very quiet. From somewhere below them came the sound of the bullpen, voices and movement, the station going about its day. I have documentation, Priya said finally. Dates, times, incident numbers that don't match the official reports. I kept records because I was scared and I thought maybe someday it would matter. She looked at Maya. Does it matter? Yes, Maya said. It matters. Priya stood up abruptly, like she was afraid of what she'd just said and needed to be somewhere else. I need to think, she said. Give me until tomorrow morning. Take the time you need, Maya said. Priya left. Maya looked at the door for a moment after she was gone. The day was almost over. One more hour, and the shift would turn over. She began organizing her materials for the evening, moving with the automatic efficiency of someone whose hands knew the work without needing to be told. Her phone buzzed on the table. Briggs, a text. Rourke filed a complaint. Says the contractor is creating a hostile work environment. HR meeting requested for tomorrow morning. Maya read it twice. Then she set the phone down and finished packing her bag. The complaint was a move. Rourke was preemptive. He'd seen her write down his badge number, seen her survive the coffee incident without breaking, noticed something off enough about her to make him want to create a paper trail. He wanted her labeled as a problem before she could label anything else. It was a smart play, the kind someone made when they were smart enough to feel threatened, but not smart enough to understand what they were actually dealing with. The HR meeting tomorrow could complicate her timeline, but it could also be useful if she let it play out correctly. People said revealing things when they thought they were winning. She walked to the stairwell, stopped. On the landing above her, Tarrant and another officer, she didn't have a name for yet, were talking. Low, clipped, the conversation stopping abruptly when they heard her on the stairs. She kept walking, eyes straight ahead, and passed them on the second-floor landing without acknowledging them. In the car, she sat for a moment before starting the engine. The surveillance cameras had been deliberately left broken. A filed complaint had been buried. A captain had been destroyed professionally for trying to report what she'd seen. And now a misconduct report had been filed against Maya within 7 days of her arrival, before she'd done anything that should have warranted it, which meant Rourke was reacting not to what she'd done but to what he suspected she was. He suspected she wasn't what she said she was. Maya started the engine. She needed the Faro file in 48 hours. She needed Priya's documentation. And she needed the HR meeting tomorrow to go exactly the right kind of wrong. She pulled out of the parking lot and onto the street, watching the 9th District building recede in her rearview mirror, its windows lit against the evening, its flag above the entrance, its broken cameras pointing at nothing. 24 hours, she thought, maybe less. And at that exact moment, her phone buzzed again on the passenger seat. She glanced at it at a red light and saw a name she hadn't expected. Gwen McCready. No number she recognized. A different one, personal, not the extension from the department directory. The message was 4 words. They know about you. They know about you. Maya read the message a second time at the red light, then a third, the way you read something when your brain refuses to accept the literal meaning on the first pass. 4 words. Gwen McCready. A personal number, not a department line. The light changed. Maya drove. She didn't pull over. Pulling over would make her a stationary target for exactly the kind of tale she was now actively considering the possibility of. She kept moving, turned left at the next intersection, then right again, running a loose surveillance detection route through a neighborhood she'd mapped during her first week in Drayfield precisely because she'd known she might need it. 3 blocks of residential streets, 1 stretch of commercial, then back to the main road. No headlights patterned behind her. She wasn't being followed, not physically at least. She called Gwen from the car, hands-free, once she'd cleared the neighborhood loop. The phone rang 4 times. 5. Then, I didn't think you'd call back this fast. Tell me what happened, Maya said. Gwen's voice was low and slightly uneven, like she was talking from somewhere she wasn't sure was private. This afternoon, after you came to see me. Rourke came to my office, which he has never done. In 6 years, he has never come to my office. And he asked me if the medical contractor had been asking questions about the building's surveillance systems. I said no. I don't know if he believed me. What exactly did he ask? He said, did she come to you about the cameras? And I said no. She asked me about a building access code. Which is technically true because I did tell you where the stairwell access panel was last week. But she stopped. He looked at me for a long time after I said it, and then he left. And 20 minutes later, one of Tarrant's guys walked past my office twice in an hour, which has also never happened. Maya processed this. Has anyone accessed your computer remotely? Any new programs installed? Anything unusual with your system? A pause. I don't know. How would I tell? I'll tell you later. Right now. Are you somewhere safe? I'm in my car, parking lot of the grocery store near my apartment. Good. Stay there for another 10 minutes, then go home a different route than you normally take. Don't go back to the station tonight. Don't access anything work-related from home. Can you do that? Yes. Then, who are you? Maya considered the question. Someone who can help, she said. That's real. She hung up and drove the rest of the way to her rented room without music, without anything except the sound of the engine and the sound of her own thinking. Rourke had moved faster than she'd anticipated. The HR complaint was one thing. That was procedural, bureaucratic self-protection. But going to Gwen directly, the same day, within hours of Gwen's conversation with Maya, that meant he was triangulating. He'd noticed Gwen. He'd noticed that Maya had been to her office. He was connecting dots, and the dots he was connecting were coming uncomfortably close to the truth. She had not been careful enough about Gwen. That was her mistake, and she sat with it for a moment the way she'd been trained to sit with mistakes. Not punishing herself, not spiraling, but looking at it directly, understanding what it meant, and then moving forward with that knowledge incorporated rather than suppressed. The mistake was real. The damage might be manageable. She needed to assess. She opened her laptop on the small table by the window and pulled up the secure communication channel she shared with Briggs. She typed quickly, "My cover may be partially compromised at the supervisory level. Rourke is aware I've been asking questions about the surveillance system. I need the Faro file faster than 48 hours if possible. Also recommend we accelerate the oversight timeline. Things are moving." She sent it and sat back. The window showed her the parking lot of the apartment complex. Ordinary, quiet, a few lights in the buildings across the street. Someone walking a dog. Someone's television visible through a first-floor window, the blue-white flicker of it. The ordinary texture of a regular evening in a city that didn't know what was happening inside one of its police districts. Her phone buzzed. "Briggs. Calling Castillo now. Stand by." 34 minutes later, he sent a follow-up. "Castillo is pushing the subpoena. 24 hours, not 48. She's also flagging the surveillance system issue for the federal file. Obstruction of evidence is a different tier of problem than misconduct. Are you okay?" Maya read the last 3 words and almost smiled. Warren Briggs had known her for 4 years, had read her file front to back, had asked her to do this knowing exactly how hard it was going to be, and his check-in was still, "Are you okay?" Not "Are you compromised?" Not "What's your status?" Just the most human version of the question. "Yes," she wrote back. "Don't pull me yet." She closed the laptop and slept 4 hours. It was enough. The HR meeting was scheduled for 9 in the morning in a conference room on the building's 3rd floor. Maya arrived at 8:45 and sat outside the room on a bench in the hallway, clipboard on her knee, expression neutral. She had dressed the same as every other day, plain scrubs, lanyard, flat shoes. The uniform of someone who didn't think she was important. The HR coordinator, a man named Douglas Page, who looked like he'd been born sitting behind a desk, appeared at 8:58 and looked mildly surprised to find her already there. "Ms. Solis?" "Yes." "Right this way." The room had a table, 6 chairs, a window that looked out at the station's rear parking lot. Page sat across from her and opened a manila folder and said, in the voice of someone reading a script he found personally tedious, "We've received a complaint from Sergeant Rourke's office alleging that you have created an uncomfortable atmosphere in the workplace through behavior inconsistent with your contractor role." He looked up. "Would you like to respond to that?" Maya said, "I'd like to understand the specific behaviors alleged." Page looked at his folder. "The complaint states that you have been asking questions outside the scope of your role, approaching officers in a manner they found intrusive, and making unauthorized requests for personnel information. The blood pressure screenings require that I ask health history questions," Maya said. "That's within scope. If officers felt the questions were intrusive, they're always welcome to decline. Regarding personnel information, I made one request through the department's official HR system using my contractor access code. That access was granted by Deputy Chief Briggs's office." She paused. "I can provide the authorization documentation if that would be helpful." Page looked at his folder again, then back at her, and she could tell from the slight adjustment in his expression that the complaint had not been written with the expectation that she'd come prepared. "That won't be necessary at this stage," he said. "The complaint also notes an incident on day 5 in which Sergeant Rourke described your behavior as confrontational." "I asked for his badge number after he poured coffee on my uniform," Maya said calmly. "I have a copy of the incident documentation I prepared that day, time-stamped, with witness designations. Would you like that for your file?" A silence. "Did Sergeant Rourke file a report on the coffee incident?" Maya asked. Another silence, of a different quality. I'll need to look into that, Paige said. Understood. Maya set her clipboard on the table. I want to be cooperative with this process. I also want to note that filing a retaliatory complaint against a contractor within 1 week of a documented incident of workplace harassment is itself a matter of record. She said it simply, not with heat, the way you stated a fact rather than issued a threat. I'm not saying that's what this is. I'm saying the sequence of events is documented. Paige looked at her for a long moment. He was, she suspected, a man who had spent years managing exactly this kind of meeting and who had learned to read a room reasonably well, and right now he was reading the room and coming to conclusions she hadn't necessarily anticipated. I'll review the file, he said, and get back to you. Thank you, Maya said. She stood, picked up her clipboard, and left. In the stairwell, she allowed herself one full breath before continuing downward. The meeting had gone the way she'd needed it to go. Paige hadn't been hostile. He'd been careful, which was more useful. Careful people recalibrated. And his final expression, before she'd left, had been one of a man who had just started asking questions he should have been asking before the complaint was filed. That was something. She went to the wellness suite, set down her bag, and found Priya Mehta sitting in one of the folding chairs with an envelope on her knee. Priya looked up when Maya came in. Her face was doing several things at once: determination and fear and something close to relief, all of them competing. I made a decision, Priya said. Maya sat down across from her. I went home last night and I looked at my files again. Priya touched the envelope. Everything I documented. And I thought about what happens if I keep sitting on this. What happens to the next person who walks into that bullpen and gets treated like... She stopped. There are other people it's happened to. I know at least 2 who left the department because of Rourke. One of them was a detective. 11 years of experience, gone, because she filed a complaint that went nowhere, and then suddenly she had performance issues she'd never had before. I can't prove that was him, but I know. She looked at Maya steadily. I know. Your documentation, Maya said. Can I see it? Priya held out the envelope. Maya opened it. Inside were 12 pages of handwritten notes. Dates, incident numbers, descriptions, cross-referenced with official report numbers that Priya had clearly obtained from the department's system and noted alongside versions that didn't match. It was methodical. It was careful. It was exactly the kind of record that a person kept when they were frightened but refused to be entirely defeated. This is good, Maya said. This is really good work, Priya. Priya exhaled like she'd been holding it. What happens now? I need to get this into the right hands, Maya said. That's going to happen faster than you might expect. When it does, you're going to be asked to make a formal statement. You don't have to do that if you decide you don't want to. But this, she held up the envelope, this is already evidence. You've already done the hard part. Is there a right part? Priya asked. That isn't hard. Not really, Maya said honestly. Priya almost smiled. It was a tired smile, the kind that came from somewhere real. She left 20 minutes later, and Maya sat for a moment with the envelope in her hands, thinking about the detective Priya had mentioned. 11 years, gone. The captain before that. The officers who'd filed complaints and found themselves buried under paperwork and poor performance reviews. The pattern was clear enough from the audit file, but hearing it from someone inside, someone who'd watched it happen and been afraid to move, made it land differently. Made it heavier. She had the weight of it now. That was appropriate. You were supposed to feel the weight. Her phone buzzed. Castillo. Faro file secured under subpoena. Sending via secure transfer now. Check your encrypted inbox. Maya opened her laptop, opened the encrypted email client she'd set up before coming to Drayfield, and waited for the file to download. The Faro report was 61 pages. She read it in 2 sittings with a 20-minute break in between. The first thing that hit her was the detail. Captain Denise Faro had been precise, systematic, almost clinical in the way she'd documented what she'd witnessed. Dates, names, incident numbers, photographs of unofficial communications between Rourke and Tarrant. She'd had 4 months of documentation when she filed. The complaint was specific, credible, and organized. The response from the department's internal affairs unit had been 3 paragraphs. The complaint was dismissed with the notation, allegations unsupported by independent evidence. Complainant's claims reflect a pattern of ongoing workplace conflict that requires supervisory attention. Then, 10 days later, administrative leave for Captain Farrow, citing a different complaint, an allegation that she had improperly accessed records outside her authority. The allegation was from Rourke. The timing was impossible to read as coincidence. Maya reached the last section of the file and found something she hadn't expected. Farrow's personal statement, appended after the fact. It wasn't part of the official complaint. It was a document Farrow had prepared and attached to her original submission, and it had apparently been included in the archived file without anyone reading it closely enough to remove it. She read the last paragraph twice. I understand that this complaint will most likely result in action against me rather than the individuals I've named. I am filing it anyway because I believe there is a record that matters even when it doesn't produce an immediate outcome. If someone reads this file after I'm gone, I want them to know exactly what they're looking at. This department has a structure of protection built around a small group of people, and that structure has been maintained through fear, retaliation, and the deliberate suppression of documentation. The cameras in the second-floor bullpen were not broken by accident. I know who disabled them, and I know why. I was not able to prove it before they removed me from this building. Maybe whoever reads this will have better luck. Maya sat very still. Farrow had known about the cameras. She'd known they were deliberately disabled. She hadn't been able to prove it, but she'd known. Maya pulled up her own notes, the facilities log she'd pulled, the name she'd circled, Gwen McCready. Then she pulled up the Farrow report and searched it for the same name. It was there, on page 37. Farrow had interviewed Gwen McCready as part of her initial investigation, and Gwen had told her, in carefully qualified language, that she had been pressured to close the surveillance maintenance ticket without completing the repair. The pressure had come from an unnamed supervisory source who had told her that the cameras were a budget issue rather than a safety issue. Farrow had noted that she was unable to identify the unnamed source before her investigation was terminated. But the name of the person who had approved the closure of the original maintenance ticket, approved it above Gwen's authority level, signed off on it as a supervisor, was right there in the records Farrow had obtained before she was removed. Sergeant Dale Rourke. Maya closed the laptop slowly. She had it now. She had the complaint. She had Priya's documentation. She had the facilities record with Rourke's signature on the camera closure approval. She had Gwen McCready as a witness. She had a federal oversight contact with the Farrow file under formal subpoena. What she didn't have was Rourke in a position where he couldn't bury it again. She needed one more thing. She needed the move to come from a level that the 9th District's internal structure couldn't intercept. That meant Castillo had to formally open the federal inquiry before Rourke could file anything that would complicate Maya's access to the building, which meant Maya needed to tell Castillo she was ready. She picked up her phone and called. Castillo. I've read the file, Maya said. I have corroborating documentation from a current officer and a civilian employee. I have the facilities record with Rourke's signature on the camera closure. I'm ready to move. A beat. Define ready. I want to be present when you make the formal approach to the district. I want to be in that building when it happens. And I want my actual clearance reinstated before then, because when Rourke sees me in that room with federal investigators, I want him to see me clearly. Another beat, longer. You want him to know it was you. I want him to understand the sequence of events correctly, Maya said. There's a difference. There's really not, Castillo said. But her voice wasn't disapproving. It was the voice of someone who understood the distinction being made, whether or not they agreed with the framing. I can have a team in Drayfield by day after tomorrow. Can you hold for 48 hours without your cover fully collapsing? I think so, Maya said. Rourke suspects something, but he doesn't know what. He's trying to identify the problem, not eliminate it. As long as I don't give him something concrete to react to, he'll stay in investigation mode. And if he finds something concrete? Then we move faster, Maya said. Okay. Castillo paused. One more thing. The Farrow file. Have you gotten to the appendix, the personal statement? Yes. There's a name in it, in the third paragraph from the end. An officer Farrow identified as potentially sympathetic, someone who'd spoken to her informally, who'd said he'd witnessed the camera interference but was afraid to put it in writing. Maya opened the file again on her laptop, navigated to the appendix, found the paragraph. The name was there, a single mention, qualified. Officer R. DOS, 9th District, described witnessing Sergeant Rourke direct a facility's request be downgraded without assessment. Did not consent to formal interview. DOS, the young officer who'd laughed with Rourke and Tarrant in the lobby, who'd gone quiet in the stairwell, who'd been present the morning of the coffee incident, and had been the only one in the group who hadn't laughed. Maya had noticed that. She'd noticed it and cataloged it and then set it aside. Now it rearranged itself in her understanding. I see it, she told Castillo. He might be reachable, Castillo said, or he might panic and go straight to Rourke. It's a judgment call. I know, Maya said. Give me time. She ended the call and sat for a moment looking at the name on her screen. Doss had been close to Rourke. He'd been present for things. He'd talked to Farrow, even if he'd refused to go on record, which meant he'd had a conscience capable of getting him that far, which was further than most people got. She would wait. She would watch. And if Doss showed her the same opening Priya had shown her, she'd take it. She had 48 hours. The next morning she arrived at the station and found the atmosphere different in a way she registered before she could name it. Something had shifted in the way the officers moved. Not the officers Rourke commanded, but the others, the ones who worked in the administrative section and filed reports and did their jobs without particular drama. They were quieter, more deliberate, like people who'd heard something pass through the walls of the building overnight and weren't sure what it meant. She found out what it meant at 10 o'clock when Douglas Page appeared at the door of the wellness suite. Ms. Solis, he said, I need to speak with you. He came inside and closed the door, which was the first unusual thing. He sat down in one of the folding chairs and set his folder on the table and didn't open it, which was the second unusual thing. I reviewed the file, he said. The HR complaint filed by Sergeant Rourke. I also reviewed your contractor authorization documentation and the access records for the HR system. He stopped. And I found something I wasn't expecting to find. Maya waited. There are 7 HR complaints in this department's file system that were closed with the same notation, Page said. Word for word. Allegations unsupported by independent evidence. Complainants' claims reflect a pattern of ongoing workplace conflict. I drafted that notation myself 3 years ago for one specific complaint. I've never used it again. He looked at her. Someone did. Who had access to the closed complaints? Maya asked. Theoretically, HR staff and supervisors above lieutenant level, Page said. In practice? He closed his mouth, opened it again. This is not something I can discuss through normal channels. You understand what I'm telling you? Yes, Maya said. I'm telling you because you came in here yesterday with documentation that I wasn't expecting a contractor to have, he said. And because whoever you actually are, you're not just a medical services coordinator. Maya looked at him steadily. I'm not going to ask, Page said. I'm going to go back to my office. But if someone asks me at some future point whether the HR complaint against you was valid, I'm going to say no, officially. He stood. That's what I can do. He left. Maya sat in the folding chair and let the weight of the morning accumulate. Paige, Gwen, Priya. These were not grand gestures. They were small, careful acts from people who had been watching things happen for years and had arrived at a private threshold of enough. Systems didn't change because one person brought them down. They changed because enough people inside them reached the point where the cost of silence finally exceeded the cost of speaking. She was watching that happen in real time. It was not clean or triumphant. It was halting and scared and imperfect. But it was happening. Her phone buzzed. Castillo. A text, not a call. Change of timeline. Team is in Drayfield. Something moved on our end. The federal audit of the department was already flagged for review before we subpoenaed the Farrow file. New information triggered an expedited review. We're moving tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. Can you be ready? Maya looked at the message. Tomorrow, 12 hours early. Which meant Rourke had 12 fewer hours, but so did she. She was typing her response. Yes. Ready. When the door to the wellness suite opened without a knock, Doss stood in the doorway. He was in uniform, hat in hand, and he looked like a man who'd been arguing with himself for a long time and had only recently lost. He was maybe 24, with the kind of face that hadn't finished deciding what it was going to look like in 10 years, and right now it was carrying something heavy. I heard, he said, without specifying what. I heard you had a meeting with HR yesterday. I did, Maya said. And I heard—" He stopped, looked at the door behind him, then back at her. "I heard from someone that you might be talking to people outside the department." Maya didn't answer. "Rourke wants me to find out what you're doing," Doss said. "He told me to come talk to you, be friendly, see what you say." He paused. "I'm telling you that because I think you should know. And because I—" He stopped again, jaw tightening, the words clearly costing him something. "I talked to someone once before, about what I saw. And it didn't go anywhere, and that person lost everything, and I've been carrying that for 2 years." "Captain Farrow," Maya said quietly. He went still. "She named you in her report," Maya said. "Not by full name. She protected you. She said you'd seen something, that you'd spoken to her informally, and she noted that you weren't ready to go on record. She protected that, even after they put her on leave." Doss's face did something she didn't have a precise word for, a kind of grief that comes from learning a kindness you didn't know you'd been given. "Tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, Maya said, "there are going to be federal investigators in this building. It's happening whether or not you do anything. But if you have something to say—" She held his gaze. "Tonight is the time to say it." Doss stood in the doorway for a long moment. Then he looked at her with an expression that had stopped performing anything and was just a person trying to figure out if they could trust what they were seeing. "I need to make a call first," he said. "Okay," Maya said. He left. She stood and went to the small window and looked out at the parking lot below. Her reflection was faint in the glass, overlaid on the street outside. A woman in plain scrubs standing in a repurposed break room, looking out at a city going about its afternoon. She looked entirely unremarkable. She looked like exactly what she'd wanted to look like when she walked in here 9 days ago, building as something else entirely. Her phone buzzed again. Not Castillo this time. Not Briggs. It was a number she didn't recognize, and the message was too long to be casual, too specific to be accidental. And as she read it, standing at the window in the last quiet hour before everything changed, she felt the situation shift in a way that had nothing to do with her plan. Someone had sent a photograph, a screenshot of an internal department email chain dated 3 hours ago between Rourke and a name she hadn't seen in any file, Deputy Superintendent Dale Rourke. The chain was short. Rourke's message read, "Contractor needs to be removed tonight. I know who she is." Rourke's reply, 40 minutes later, was 4 words. "Handle it. Leave nothing." The phone in her hand felt very steady. Rourke knew, and now someone above Rourke knew. And whoever had sent her this screenshot, she didn't know yet, couldn't know yet, had chosen to warn her rather than stay quiet, which meant the next 12 hours were no longer about executing a plan on her timeline. She called Castillo, and the phone rang once before it connected. "We have a problem," Maya said, "and I need you to move tonight." Castillo picked up before the second ring. "Talk to me," she said. Maya read her the email chain verbatim, standing at the window, voice low and flat. She didn't editorialize. She didn't add commentary. She gave Castillo the names, the timestamps, the exact wording, and then she stopped. Silence on the line. The kind of silence that meant someone was thinking hard and fast. "Rourke," Castillo said finally. "Gerald Rourke is a deputy superintendent." "Yes. That's not a sergeant protecting himself anymore. That's the second floor of this department's command structure actively involved." Another pause. "Who sent you the screenshot?" "I don't know yet. Unknown number." "Someone inside the building." "Has to be," Maya said. The chain was 3 hours old. Whoever sent it had access and made a decision in under 3 hours. That's not random. "Could be a trap," Castillo said. "Could be," Maya said. "But if Rourke already knows who I am, the trap is already sprung. The screenshot doesn't change that. What it changes is the timeline and the scope." She heard Castillo exhale, not in frustration, but in the particular way of someone recalibrating under pressure, the way a person sounds when they're pulling a larger response together than they'd planned. "I need 30 minutes, Castillo said. "Don't go back to that station tonight. Do not make contact with anyone inside the building. I'll call you back." 30 minutes, Maya said. She put the phone down and stood in the middle of the small room, thinking about Gerald Rourke. She'd seen the name in the department's organizational chart, but hadn't flagged it. Deputy Superintendent was above her operational focus, too senior to be directly involved in the day-to-day behavior she'd been documenting, which meant she'd made an assumption. The rot didn't stop at Rourke. Rourke was the mechanism. Rourke was something else, protection, perhaps, or active partnership, or something more transactional that she hadn't yet mapped. Handle it, leave nothing. Those were not the words of someone who'd just heard about a problem for the first time. She packed her materials into her bag with the same methodical efficiency she'd used every night for 9 days, then sat on the edge of the bed and waited. Castillo called back in 26 minutes. "Change of plan," she said. "We're not waiting until morning. I've briefed my supervisor and we're treating Rourke's email as active obstruction of a federal inquiry, which it is, the moment it was sent, because the inquiry was already formally opened when he typed those words. We can move on that tonight." She paused. "I'm also running Rourke through the federal database. He has connections to 2 previous departmental audits in other cities, both closed without findings. Both had the same pattern: complaints suppressed, witnesses suddenly unavailable." "He's done this before," Maya said. "More than once," Castillo said. "We think the 9th District may not be the only department he's been running interference for. This is bigger than Rourke." A pause. "Which means your case just became the tip of something considerably larger. My supervisor is notifying the regional director. Tonight." Maya processed this. "What do you need from me?" "We need you physically present when we execute the formal approach, but not as a contractor. I'm reactivating your administrative clearance effective now. When we walk into that building tonight, you walk in as what you are." Castillo's voice was careful and precise. "Captain Maya Solis, Office of Law Enforcement Oversight, Drayfield District Review. That's the designation. Are you ready for that?" The question settled over her with a weight that was not fear and not quite satisfaction either. It was something more specific, the weight of a thing becoming what it had always been going to be. "Yes," Maya said. "Team arrives at your location in 90 minutes. Get changed." She hung up. She opened her bag and moved past the scrubs she'd folded at the bottom and found what she'd packed underneath them 9 days ago and not touched since. A collared shirt, dark, pressed. A jacket. The credential wallet with her actual identification and the silver insignia she hadn't worn since she arrived in Drayfield. She laid them out on the bed and looked at them for a moment. Then she got up and started getting dressed. Castillo's team was 4 people, 2 federal investigators, a records specialist named Torres, who carried a hard case of portable drives, and a legal attaché named Holt, whose job was to ensure the formal paperwork was airtight at every step. They arrived in 2 vehicles, unmarked but not subtle, and Torres immediately set up a mobile documentation station in the back of the larger one. Castillo herself was compact and direct, with the kind of stillness that came from being in too many situations where moving incautiously had cost someone something. She looked at Maya in the jacket and insignia and said, "Better." "Let's go," Maya said. They drove to the 9th District in convoy, arriving at 9:47 in the evening. The night shift had been on for less than 2 hours. The lobby would be staffed, but the bullpen would be reduced. Fewer officers, which meant fewer variables, which meant fewer opportunities for someone to make a decision Rourke could use later. The desk officer on duty was a young woman named Reyes, who Maya had seen in passing twice during the week. She looked up when the 5 of them came through the door, and her expression shifted through several stages in about 2 seconds. Confusion, assessment, the beginning of a question. Maya placed her credential wallet on the desk, open. "Captain Maya Solis, Office of Law Enforcement Oversight. We're here on a formal federal inquiry. I need you to contact your duty supervisor now, please." Reyes looked at the credentials, looked at Maya, looked at the 4 people behind her. Then she reached for the phone. "Yes, ma'am," she said. The duty supervisor arrived in 4 minutes, a lieutenant named Graves, who Maya had noted during the week as one of the officers who kept his distance from Rourke's group. He came down the stairs quickly and stopped at the bottom when he saw the configuration of people in his lobby. "Lieutenant Graves," Maya said. "I'm Captain Solis. My team has federal authority to access personnel records and physical premises as part of an active oversight inquiry. I need you to provide access to the HR records room on the 3rd floor and the building's surveillance maintenance logs. I also need you to ensure that Sergeant Rourke and Corporal Tarrant are not notified of our presence in the building until we've secured the records. Can you do that?" Graves looked at her clearance documentation, which Castillo had stepped forward to present. He read it carefully. He was the kind of man who read things carefully, which was why she'd noted him. "Yes," he said. "I can do that." "Thank you." The records room was on the third floor, adjacent to the HR suite. Torres and the legal attaché went there directly with Graves as escort. Castillo stayed with Maya, and they took the stairs to the second floor, where the bullpen was running on a skeleton crew. 3 officers at desks, none of them Rourke's people. Maya went to the HR system terminal, entered her actual clearance credentials, her real ones, the ones that had been dormant for 9 days, and began pulling the files she needed. The screen populated differently than it had under the contractor code. Layers of access she hadn't had before opened now, and she worked through them with Torres's guidance through a 2-way earpiece, pulling and flagging and timestamping. The surveillance maintenance file came up under her direct access, and she found Rourke's signature on the camera closure authorization within 40 seconds. She printed it. She flagged it in the federal system with a timestamp that logged her clearance code, the location, and the time of access, creating a federal record that could not be altered or suppressed by anyone below her clearance tier. "Got the Faro complaint cross-reference," Torres said in her ear, matching the dismissal notations. 7 complaints, same language, all approved at supervisory level between 2019 and 2023. "Log them all," Maya said. "Already done." 40 minutes in, Castillo appeared at Maya's shoulder. "Rourke just badged into the building," she said quietly. "Main entrance. He wasn't on tonight's roster." Maya didn't stop typing. "Someone called him." "Almost certainly. Do you want to—" "Let him come up," Maya said. "Let him see." She heard Castillo pause behind her. Then, "Okay." She kept working. She heard him before she saw him. The sound of the stairwell door, then footsteps she'd spent 9 days learning to recognize. Then the particular quality of a room changing when someone enters it who is used to the room changing when they enter it. She finished the entry she was logging, time-stamped it, and then turned around. Rourke stood at the entrance to the bullpen in civilian clothes, jeans, a dark jacket, the look of someone who'd gotten dressed fast and driven here faster. His eyes went to Maya first and stayed there for a moment with an expression that cycled rapidly through several things before settling into something harder than any of them. Then he looked at the insignia on her jacket. "Captain," he said. "Sergeant," Maya said. The word landed differently in her mouth now. Not because of the rank, she'd always known the rank, but because of the 9 days between then and now, the 9 days of coffee-stained scrubs and folding tables, and watching people be afraid, and writing down badge numbers on a clipboard like she was nobody. "You want to tell me what's happening here?" he said. His voice was controlled, but the control was costing him something. "We're executing a federal oversight review of personnel records and complaint files for the 9th District, Maya said. "You're not on tonight's shift roster. I'm going to need to ask you to remain in the building while we complete our documentation." "Remain in the—" He stopped, looked at Castillo's credentials, looked at the federal insignia on Torres's jacket through the open door of the records room, looked back at Maya. "You were here," he said, "all week, in the scrubs." "I was," Maya said. Something moved through his face, not quite anger, not quite fear, something between them that was worse than either. The specific expression of a man who has been completely outmaneuvered and is only now realizing how long ago the move was made. "You have no idea," he started. "Sergeant Rourke," Castillo said, stepping forward. "We'd like you to take a seat." He looked at Castillo. He looked at Maya. His jaw tightened. He sat. The records retrieval took another hour and 20 minutes. During that time, Rourke sat in a chair against the wall of the bullpen with the particular stillness of someone performing calm for an audience while running calculations underneath it. Maya was aware of him in the way you're aware of a pressure system at the edge of a weather map. Not directly dangerous yet, but something to track. At 11:40, the stairwell door opened again, and 2 more people came onto the floor. Maya looked up and recognized neither of them, but Castillo did. She crossed the room quickly and spoke to them in low, quick sentences, and then came back to Maya with an expression that was controlled enough to make Maya pay attention. "My supervisor," Castillo said quietly, "and someone from the regional director's office. The work element escalated faster than I expected. Is that a problem?" "No," Castillo said. "It's the opposite. They want Wark brought in for questioning tonight, not tomorrow. That means we're moving on multiple levels simultaneously, which means she glanced at Rourke. We need to formalize his status now rather than in the morning. Maya nodded once. She walked to where Rourke was sitting. He looked up at her. His expression had settled into something flat and watchful. Sergeant Rourke, she said, I'm informing you that as of this moment, you are the subject of a formal federal investigation into misconduct, obstruction of evidence, and workplace harassment. You are not under arrest at this time, but you are required to remain available for questioning and you are suspended from duty pending the outcome of the review. Do you understand? He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, You don't know what you've started. I know exactly what I've started, Maya said. And I know exactly what you started 9 days ago in this bullpen with a cup of coffee, badge number 471. She held his gaze. I wrote it down. She walked away. The next 3 hours were the particular controlled chaos of a federal investigation in motion. Forms, chains of custody, witness notifications, a phone call that Castillo took in the stairwell that lasted 45 minutes and ended with Castillo coming back looking like someone who'd just been given a larger assignment than she'd left the room with. Torres filled 4 portable drives. The legal attaché processed documentation with the focused speed of someone who'd done exactly this before and knew which corners you couldn't cut. At 2 in the morning, Deputy Superintendent Gerald Rourke was brought into the building by 2 federal investigators who had driven to his home address with a formal notification order. He came in wearing a suit jacket over pajama pants, which would have been almost funny if his face hadn't carried the specific blankness of someone who'd been in this position before and already knew what the next several hours were going to look like. He saw Maya in the hallway near the records room and stopped walking. She'd never seen him in person before. He was in his 60s, silver-haired, with the bearing of someone who'd spent decades in rooms where authority was performed through posture and tone rather than documented. He looked at her the way you look at something that shouldn't exist according to your understanding of the world. You're Solis, he said. Yes, she said. You're the one who's been… He seemed to recalibrate mid-sentence. I want my lawyer. You're right, Maya said. Someone will facilitate that. She stepped aside to let the investigators continue walking him forward, and as he passed, she could see from the set of his shoulders that he was already building a version of events in his head, a counter-narrative, the kind men like Rourke built automatically in situations like this. She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. At 3:15 in the morning, her phone buzzed with a number she didn't recognize, different from the one that had sent the screenshot. She answered it. Is this Captain Solis? The voice was female, middle-aged, careful. Yes, Maya said. My name is Denise Farrow. Maya went still. She was standing in the hallway outside the records room with a cup of bad coffee from the break room and approximately 45 minutes of sleep in her system, and she went absolutely still. I heard from someone inside the building that the investigation is happening tonight, Farrow said. I've been waiting 2 years. She stopped, started again. I need to know if it's real this time. It's real, Maya said. A silence on the line, long enough that Maya thought the call had dropped. I have additional documentation, Farrow said. Things I couldn't submit through the official process because they would have been buried the same way. I kept copies. I've had them for 2 years. I want all of it, Maya said. Can you come in? Not to that building, Farrow said. Not yet. I understand, Maya said. Tell me where. By 4 in the morning, the immediate records operation was complete, the physical security of the documentation confirmed, and Rourke and Rourke were separately sequestered under investigative hold with legal representation en route. Lieutenant Graves had been quiet and cooperative through all of it, and Maya found him in the break room at 4:15 making coffee with the focused concentration of someone who needed something to do with his hands. You knew something was wrong, she said. Not a question. He looked at her. I knew enough to stay out of it, he said, which is not the same as doing the right thing. I'm aware of that. For what it's worth, Maya said, staying out of it kept you in a position to do what you did tonight. Some situations need someone who hasn't been touched. He looked at her cup of bad coffee and then at the fresh pot he'd made. He poured her a new cup without asking. She accepted it without making a thing of it. She drank the coffee and thought about Farrow, sitting somewhere in Drayfield with 2 years' worth of documents she'd carried alone, waiting to find out if this time it was real. She thought about Priya, asleep somewhere, not yet knowing that the thing she'd handed over in an envelope had already become part of a federal record. She thought about Gwen, who had told the truth in 6 words to a woman she'd never met, and then driven home a different way. Systems didn't change because of one dramatic intervention. They changed because enough quiet people made enough small decisions in enough careful moments, and one day the weight tipped. She was watching the weight tip. Her phone rang. Castillo. "We have a development," Castillo said. Her voice was controlled in a way that meant the development was significant. Records team found something in the archived files that wasn't in the subpoenaed materials. A secondary complaint record. An officer who filed a report 3 years ago that was entered into the system and then manually deleted. Except it wasn't fully deleted. The deletion log still exists in the back end, which means we can recover what was filed. "What was it?" Maya asked. "Use of force incident," Castillo said. Suspect claimed he was assaulted during arrest. Medical records were requested as evidence. The records were provided, but the records team found a discrepancy in the timestamps. The medical file was accessed and modified 22 minutes before it was submitted as evidence. Maya felt something shift in the structure of the case. Not collapsing, but expanding, adding a floor she hadn't known was there. Modified how? "Injuries were understated," Castillo said. The treating physician's notes listed contusions consistent with blunt force impact to the face and ribs. The version submitted to the internal review listed only, and I'm quoting, "minor abrasions, no significant trauma." Different language, same file header. She paused. Whoever modified that file had system access at the supervisory level, and the access log for that modification shows the IP address of a terminal in the 9th District. "When?" Maya asked, though she already knew the shape of the answer before Castillo gave it. 3 years ago, Castillo said. Same week Captain Farrow's complaint was filed. Maya set down her coffee. Rourke hadn't just suppressed complaints. He hadn't just broken cameras and buried paperwork. He had falsified medical evidence in a use of force case, which meant there was a person somewhere in this city who had been injured and whose injuries had been made to disappear on paper, and that person had never gotten a real accounting of what had happened to them. "Do we have a name on the suspect?" Maya asked. "Marcus Webb," Castillo said. "How was released after the charge was dropped. No physical evidence of assault, per the modified records. He filed a civil claim 18 months later that was settled out of court, terms sealed." Webb. She didn't have that name in any file she'd read. He'd been entirely outside her case until 30 seconds ago. "I need to find him," Maya said. "Already on it," Castillo said. "But there's something else. The modification to Webb's medical file. The access log shows the supervisory terminal. We've been assuming that was Rourke, but Rourke didn't have supervisory system access 3 years ago." She paused. "Rourke did." The hallway was very quiet. "That's not misconduct oversight anymore," Maya said. "No," Castillo said. "It's not. We're looking at evidence falsification in a criminal proceeding. That's a different charge tier entirely. Rourke is going to need more than a lawyer. He's going to need a very good one." Another pause. "We also need to inform the DA's office before morning because Webb's civil settlement may need to be reviewed. That case was settled on false premises." Maya pressed 2 fingers against the bridge of her nose. The scope of it kept expanding. Every answer opened a room with another door. "How long before we can bring in Webb?" she asked. "We need to locate him first. Torres is running that now." A beat. "Maya, this is going to be a long one. You know that." "I know," Maya said. She ended this call and stood in the hallway for a moment, listening to the building settle around her. The sounds of the investigation still moving through the floors above, a door closing somewhere, voices at a low professional register. The night shift was nearly over. In a few hours, the morning crew would come in to find their building rearranged around them, and the task of explaining what had happened and why would begin in earnest. She walked toward the stairwell. She needed to check on Torres, check on the records team, check on a dozen things in a sequence that was going to require the next several hours of her complete attention. She was halfway up the stairs when her phone buzzed one more time. Not Castillo. Not Briggs. The unknown number, the same one that had sent the screenshot of Rourke and Rourke's email chain. This time it was a photograph. Taken tonight, from somewhere outside the building. Angled upward from the street, through a window, showing the second-floor bullpen, showing Maya standing at the HR terminal with her jacket and insignia visible through the glass. Someone had been watching the building from outside while all of this was happening. And below the photograph, one line of text, "You got Rourke and Rourke. But there's a third name you don't have yet. Check who authorized the web settlement. That money didn't come from the department budget." Maya stared at the screen. The investigation had just changed shape again, and the person changing it was someone she couldn't identify. Someone who'd had access to Rourke's email chain 3 hours ago and access to a street-level view of her operation tonight. Someone who had been feeding her information across 2 contacts while remaining completely invisible. She didn't know if they were an ally, a witness, or something more complicated than either. She forwarded the photograph and the message to Castillo with a single line. "We're not done. There's someone else. And whoever's been helping me, I still don't know who they are." Her phone was back in her pocket and she was moving up the stairs when, from the floor above her, she heard something she had not expected to hear at 4:30 in the morning in a building under federal investigation. The sound of Rourke's voice, louder than it should have been, and then a sharp sudden crash. And then Castillo's voice saying something clipped and urgent. And then the stairwell door above her burst open. Torres stood at the top of the stairs, breathing hard. "Rourke got out of the room," she said. "He had a phone we didn't take. He made a call. 3 minutes ago, every external camera feed for this building went dark." Maya was already moving up the stairs before Torres finished the sentence. The second floor was controlled chaos in the specific way that federal operations became chaotic. Not loud, not panicked, but compressed. Every person in the room doing 2 things at once, while tracking 3 others. Castillo was at the bullpen entrance with one of her investigators, speaking rapidly into her radio. 2 of the night shift officers stood near the far wall, looking uncertain in the way of people who understood something serious was happening, but hadn't been told which side of it they were on. Rourke was gone from the chair. "Which way?" Maya asked Torres, who was right behind her. "Stairwell on the north end," he went down. "We have someone on the ground floor, but—" Maya was already moving. She took the north stairwell fast, not running but close, her hand on the rail for the turns. The stairwell smelled like concrete and cleaning fluid and the particular staleness of a building that never fully aired out. She hit the ground floor and pushed through the door into the rear corridor, which ran the length of the building's back end, and connected the records storage, the facilities office, and the rear exit that opened onto the staff parking lot. The rear exit was open. Not broken. The handle was intact, no alarm triggered, which meant someone had propped it or it had been left that way, and either option told her something. She went through it. The parking lot was half empty at this hour, the overhead lights casting yellow pools on wet asphalt from rain that had come through while they were inside. She scanned the lot, the shadows at the edges, the gap between the building's rear wall and the fence line. A movement near the far row of vehicles, not running, walking fast, the particular gait of someone trying to look purposeful rather than fleeing. Rourke. He was 30 meters out, moving toward the northeast corner of the lot where a gap in the fence led to the adjacent street. He hadn't seen her yet. She gauged the distance, the angle, and called out, "Rourke." He stopped, turned. For a moment they were just 2 people in a parking lot at 4:30 in the morning, facing each other across wet asphalt under yellow light. And the absurdity of that image was not lost on Maya, even as she was calculating her next 4 moves. "There's nowhere to go," she said. "Castillo has your phone call flagged. Whoever you called, they're already being identified." "You don't know who I called," he said. "I know enough," she said. "I know the cameras went dark 30 seconds after you made the call, which means whoever you reached has access to this building's external feed. That's not a street contact, Rourke. That's someone with administrative access, and there are 5 people in this department with that access level, and 3 of them are currently inside that building cooperating with federal investigators." She kept her voice even, unhurried. "Do the math." Something moved in his face. The calculation she'd seen him running all night was still running, but the outputs kept coming back wrong, and he knew it. "I'm not going back in there," he said. "Then you're making this significantly worse for yourself," Maya said. "Right now you're looking at misconduct and obstruction. If you run, you add flight to federal investigators. If whoever you called does something tonight based on that call, you add conspiracy. Those are not the same sentence." He looked at her for a long moment. The fight in him was still there. She could see it. The part of him that had spent 11 years operating in an environment where he was the threat and everyone else was managing the threat. That part of him didn't know how to be on the other side of it. It kept reaching for a move that wasn't available anymore. "The camera shot of you in the scrubs," he said. "Rourke's going to say he didn't know who you were until I told him. He's going to say that email was just a misunderstanding. He's going to walk." "He's not going to walk," Maya said. "You don't know Rourke." "I know what's in his access logs," Maya said. "I know what he did to Marcus Webb's medical file. That's not a misunderstanding." Rourke went very still. It was the stillness of someone for whom a piece of information has just rearranged the structure of everything they thought they knew about their own situation. Webb's name had done something to him. Not the guilt of a man who hadn't known, but the specific shock of a man who had known and had believed it was buried deeply enough to never surface. He came back inside. Castillo met them at the rear entrance with the controlled expression of someone who had been 30 seconds from authorizing a broader search and was now recalibrating. She looked at Rourke, looked at Maya, and said nothing, just nodded once and stepped aside to let them through. Rourke was formally detained on the ground floor in the presence of the legal attaché Holt, his rights documented, his phone, recovered from his jacket pocket, placed into an evidence bag with a chain of custody log. He sat down when they asked him to sit, and didn't say anything else. Whatever the parking lot had taken out of him, it hadn't come back. Maya went back upstairs. Torres had restored the external camera feeds within 12 minutes of them going dark, not by reversing whatever Rourke's contact had done, but by switching to a backup feed that the 9th District's IT system maintained as a redundancy protocol. It was the kind of detail that was in a facilities manual somewhere, and that most people in the building hadn't known existed, including, apparently, whoever had cut the primary feeds. "Same gap as before," Torres said, showing Maya the footage on her screen. "The primary feeds use a centralized access point. Whoever killed them used an administrative credential, which means we can trace the credential even if we can't immediately identify the person." "Do it," Maya said. She went to the window, the same window she'd stood at during the week in her scrubs, looking at the same parking lot she'd just crossed in the dark, and checked her phone. Castillo's team had flagged the outgoing call from Rourke's recovered device within the last 20 minutes. A number registered to a prepaid account, already being run through the federal trace system. Not fast, but moving. The unknown contact who'd been sending her information had still not identified themselves. She had the two messages, the screenshot, the photograph from outside the building. Torres had run the images through metadata extraction and found both stripped clean, taken on a device that had location data disabled and had processed the images through at least one additional layer before sending. Whoever they were technically careful in a way that wasn't accidental. That meant resources, or knowledge, or both. At 6 in the morning, Castillo's supervisor, a man named Aldridge from the regional director's office, 50s, tired, carrying the particular authority of someone used to being the most senior person in a room, called a situation briefing in the third-floor conference room. Maya sat across the table from him and walked through the case structure. The complaint history, the camera interference, Farrow's report, Priya's documentation, Webb's medical file modification, Rourke's access log. She laid it out in sequence, without editorializing, the way she'd been trained to present information, clear line from action to evidence to implication. Aldridge listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment, then said, "The Webb file modification, that's the load-bearing piece." "Yes," Maya said, "because misconduct and obstruction are administrative and potentially criminal depending on how the DA frames it. But falsifying medical evidence in a use of force proceeding, that's obstruction of justice in a criminal matter," Maya said. "Different statute, different sentencing tier." "And you're confident the access log stands up?" Torres confirmed the log format matches federal evidence standards. The modification timestamp is consistent with the document's internal metadata. They don't match each other. Whoever altered Webb's file changed the document content, but didn't account for the system's back-end timestamp, which recorded the modification at a different layer than the document's visible history. She paused. "It's a technical error. Someone with enough access to get into the file, but not enough technical knowledge to clean up after themselves completely." Aldridge tapped his pen on the table twice. "Rourke. His access level, his terminal, his timestamp," Maya said. "He'll claim credential theft," Aldridge said. He'll say someone used his login." "He can claim it," Maya said, The log also shows his keycard access to his office at the time of the modification, building access and system access. Same 2-minute window. That's harder to explain away. Aldridge looked at her for a moment with the expression of someone who has just confirmed something they'd been hoping to confirm. "You built this cleanly," he said, "given the circumstances. 9 days undercover with partial cover, escalating interference, and you held the evidentiary integrity." "I had help," Maya said, "from people inside that building who were more afraid of staying quiet than they were of speaking." She meant it. She meant it entirely. The formal hearing for Rourke and Rourke was scheduled before a federal review panel for 10 days out, which was fast by the standards of these proceedings, pushed by the weight of the evidentiary record and the regional director's office wanting this resolved before it expanded further. In the interim, both men were suspended with pay. The pay part rankled Maya, but she understood the procedural necessity, and barred from the 9th District building or contact with any department personnel. Tarrant was suspended separately pending review of 3 specific incidents Priya's documentation had flagged. He didn't fight it. He came in, received the notification from Graves, and left the building without speaking to anyone, which told Maya that whatever he'd been told about how this would go had not prepared him for how it was going. Doss came in at 8 that morning, having apparently not slept. He found Maya in the 3rd-floor conference room, where she'd set up a temporary operational space, and he knocked on the open door and waited to be acknowledged. "I made a call last night," he said. "Like I said I needed to." "I know," Maya said. "Who did you call?" "My older brother," Doss said. "He's an attorney. Criminal defense, but he knows the difference between protecting yourself and protecting something that needs to be brought down." He looked at his hands. "He told me to go on record. He said the only version of this that ends okay for me is the one where I tell the truth first." "He's right," Maya said. "I saw Rourke instruct the facility's request downgrade," Doss said. He said it quickly, like something that needed to come out fast or it would be swallowed again. The camera closure. He called Gwen McReady into the hallway outside the records room and told her the ticket was being marked resolved. She looked like she was going to argue, and then she didn't. "I was at the far end of the hall. I don't think either of them saw me." He paused. "I told Captain Farrow. In the parking lot of the gas station 2 blocks from here, 6 weeks before she was put on leave. I told her, and then I panicked and told her I couldn't put it in writing, and she said okay, and she never contacted me again." "She protected you," Maya said. "Yeah." He said the word like it was a thing he'd been carrying for 2 years without knowing quite what to call it. "Yeah, she did." "I need you to give that statement to the federal investigator," Maya said. "Today, if you can. The formal record strengthens everything else." "I know," he said. "That's why I'm here." She sent him to Torres with the instruction to process his statement with full witness protection documentation, which was standard in cases of internal affairs testimony and which would provide him with legal insulation from any retaliation. Not that Rourke was in a position to retaliate, but the protections mattered regardless. They mattered symbolically as much as practically. They told the person who came forward that the system had a way of holding what they gave it. By mid-morning, Marcus Webb had been located through Torres's database search. He was living in a city 40 minutes from Drayfield, working in logistics. He was 31 years old. His civil settlement had paid him $62,000 under terms that required him not to discuss the incident publicly or contact the department in any capacity. Castillo called Maya to tell her when Torres found him and said, "The settlement money. We ran the source." Maya said, "Tell me." "It didn't come from the department's legal fund," Castillo said. "It came from a private liability account attached to a shell entity. The entity was incorporated 2 years before the Webb incident and has made 4 other settlements in the past decade, all involving civil complaints against law enforcement in 3 different jurisdictions. 4 other settlements, 3 different jurisdictions. Someone has been running a private fund to quietly pay off civil complaints," Maya said. "Someone who needed those complaints settled confidentially before they could become public record and connect the pattern," Castillo said. "The shell entities incorporating documents list a registered agent. We're running that now." Maya sat at the conference table and looked at the caseboard Torres's team had assembled on the wall. Photographs, document copies, connecting lines in dry erase marker. It had started as 1 sergeant in 1 district. It had become 2. Now it was the shadow of something with 4 other settlements and 3 jurisdictions, and a private fund designed to make problems disappear before anyone asked the right questions. The unknown contact had told her to check who authorized the web settlement. They'd known about the shell entity. They'd known there was a third name. Castillo, she said. The registered agent for the shell entity. When you have it, I'll call you immediately, Castillo said. The call came 40 minutes later. Castillo's voice, when Maya answered, had shifted into the register of someone who has confirmed something they weren't entirely sure they were going to confirm. The registered agent, Castillo said, is a law firm out of Drayfield. Hendricks and Prawl, corporate and liability. Standard incorporation work. Nothing notable on the surface. She paused. Except that the founding partner, Leonard Prawl, retired from the Drayfield Police Department 17 years ago at the rank of deputy chief. The room was very quiet. He was Rourke's predecessor, Maya said. He was Rourke's direct mentor, Castillo said. He brought Rourke up through the department, and when he left for private practice, one of his firm's first major clients was the city's law enforcement liability division. She let that sit for a moment. He's been on the outside of the department for 17 years, managing the cleanup. Rourke was on the inside, controlling what needed cleaning. Rourke was the mechanism. 3 names. Rourke was the hand. Rourke was the authority. Prawl was the architecture. The unknown contact had known all of this. They'd been feeding her pieces in sequence, screenshot, photograph, settlement source, and each piece had pointed to the next. They weren't just a witness. They were someone who understood the entire structure, who had mapped it in full, who had been sitting with that map and waiting for the right moment to hand it to the right person. We need Prawl, Maya said. He's a private citizen with a law license, Castillo said. We need the shell entity records before we can approach him. Judge is reviewing the financial subpoena now. That takes a few hours at minimum. A pause. Maya, whoever your unknown contact is, they knew about Prawl. They sent you to the settlement. They've been pointing this whole investigation. I know, Maya said. That person has been carrying this for a while, Castillo said quietly. And they chose you to hand it to. Maya thought about that for a moment. Then she said, I need to meet with Denise Farrow this afternoon. She said she has additional documentation. I think she needs to see where we are. Agreed, Castillo said. Take Holt with you for the formal chain of custody on whatever she brings. Maya drove to the address Farrow had given her, a coffee shop 12 blocks from the 9th District, the kind that had been there long enough to have regulars and mismatched chairs and a counterstaff who ignored you if you wanted to be ignored. Holt sat 2 tables away with a document case and a coffee she didn't drink. Denise Farrow was already there when Maya arrived. She was in her mid-50s, with the contained energy of someone who'd learned to hold a lot still. She watched Maya come in and cross the room toward her, and for a moment, her face did something that wasn't quite readable. Relief mixed with something older and harder, the expression of someone who'd been told something was coming for so long that the arrival of it felt almost disorienting. Captain Solis, she said. Captain Farrow, Maya said. They shook hands. They sat. Farrow had a bag with her that she'd been holding with both hands and now set on the table between them. 2 years, she said. I've been keeping this for 2 years. There were nights I almost burned it. I'm glad you didn't, Maya said. It's not just the documentation I couldn't submit, Farrow said. She opened the bag and slid a flat envelope across the table. It's the name of the person who told me about Prawl. Told me 2 weeks before I was put on leave. Someone who was afraid to come forward themselves but gave me enough that I knew the shape of the thing even if I couldn't prove it. Maya looked at the envelope. I've been protecting that name for 2 years, Farrow said. But I think, she paused, I think that person might be ready now. Because whoever has been helping you, she met Maya's eyes. I think it might be the same person. Maya opened the envelope. The name inside it was one she recognized instantly. Not from the case files, not from the department records, not from any document Torres had processed or Castillo had pulled. From the department's organizational chart. The one she'd reviewed on her first day in Drayfield, sitting in her car in the parking lot, doing her baseline mapping. Douglas Page, HR coordinator. The man who'd called her into his office and told her about the 7 complaints with identical dismissal language. who'd looked at her the morning after with the expression of a man who had started asking questions he should have asked years ago, who had, she now understood, been asking those questions quietly for 2 years, feeding pieces to Pharaoh, feeding pieces to Maya, from a position inside the building where he could see everything and had calculated, with the particular patience of someone who had waited a long time for the conditions to be right, exactly when to act. She looked at the name for a long moment. Then her phone buzzed on the table. Torres. Financial subpoena approved. Bank records for shell entity coming through now. You need to see this immediately. Prawl isn't just the registered agent. His signature is on every settlement authorization. And there's a 6th settlement we didn't know about, filed 8 months ago. Same shell entity, different jurisdiction. The complainant's name is Reyes. Reyes. The desk officer who'd been on duty last night when Maya walked in with her credentials and her team, who'd looked at Maya's badge and said, "Yes, ma'am," and reached for the phone without hesitation, who had been on the night shift, the quietest shift, the one where you could make a phone call without being observed. Maya read the message twice. Then she looked up at Pharaoh, who was watching her face with the particular attention of someone who'd learned to read situations from the expressions of the people in them. "There's one more thread," Maya said. "There usually is," Pharaoh said quietly. Maya picked up her phone and called Castillo. "I need you to pull Officer Reyes from her shift right now," she said. "Not as a suspect, as a witness. She filed a complaint 8 months ago that was settled through Prawl's shell entity. She may not even know the full scope of what she was dealing with." She paused. "And Castillo, she was on the desk last night when we came in. She saw everything. She saw Rourke brought in. She saw Rourke. She saw the whole federal operation." A brief silence. "You think she called someone?" "I think she might have been told to," Maya said. "Not because she's corrupt, because someone has had leverage over her for 8 months, and she may not have known how to do anything other than what she was told." She kept her voice even. "Bring her in carefully. She's not the problem. She's someone the problem used." "On it," Castillo said. Maya ended the call and sat for a moment in the coffee shop with Denise Farrow across from her and Holt, 2 tables away, and the envelope on the table between them and the sound of the city outside beginning its morning in full, traffic and voices, and the ordinary weight of a day that didn't know it was the day this particular accounting finally came due. "What happens now?" Farrow asked. "Now it gets finished," Maya said. "All of it." Farrow nodded slowly. She looked out the window for a moment, then back. "I spent 2 years wondering if I'd done the wrong thing by filing," she said. "If I should have just stayed quieter, kept my head down, found a way to work around it." "Would you have been able to?" Maya asked. Farrow thought about it honestly. "No," she said. "I don't think I would have." "Then you did the only thing you could do," Maya said, "and it's why we're sitting here." She picked up the envelope, stood, and carried it to Holt's table to begin the chain of custody documentation. Behind her, she heard Farrow let out a breath, long and slow, the kind of exhale that carries 2 years of held weight with it. And the sound of it was very human and very real in the ordinary noise of the morning. Outside, through the coffee shop window, the city was going about its business under a sky that had gone from black to gray to the particular pale clarity of early morning. Somewhere in Drayfield, in a building 12 blocks from here, the federal investigation was still running. The records were being processed. The names were being added to documents that would become the permanent account of what had happened in the 9th District, and who had made it happen, and who had kept it running for how long. Torres sent one more message while Maya was standing at Holt's table. Shell entity records flagged a wire transfer 6 weeks ago, sent from Prawl's firm account to a private account registered to Gerald Rourke's home address. Amount $240,000. This isn't just a settlement fund anymore. This is a payment. Maya read it standing up. A payment, not a settlement, not a legal fee. A direct transfer from the man who'd built the architecture to the man who'd been running it 6 weeks ago, which was 2 weeks before Maya had arrived in Drayfield, and which meant that someone, somewhere, had already known something was coming. She looked at Torres's message for a long moment. Then she looked at the address the transfer had come from. Hendricks and Prawl, 4th floor, the Calvert Building, downtown Drayfield. And she looked at the timestamp of the transfer. 6 weeks ago. The same week Warren Briggs had first contacted her and asked her to come to Drayfield. Her chest went very still. Someone had known Briggs was moving before Briggs had made his move. Someone had known an investigation was coming and had transferred $240,000 to Rourke as what? Hazard pay? Insurance? A payment for services that were about to become considerably more complicated? Or a payment to make sure that if things went wrong, Rourke had resources to manage the fallout in a way that kept Prall's name out of it. She forwarded Torres's message to Castillo with one line. Prall knew we were coming. Find out how. The answer to that question, she understood, was the last door. And whatever was behind it was going to determine whether this ended cleanly or whether it opened into something larger and more complicated than anything she'd mapped so far. Her phone rang. Castillo, not a text this time. A call, which meant urgent. She answered it. We found the leak, Castillo said. Her voice was careful in the way of someone delivering information that changes the shape of the room. The wire transfer. We ran the origin account backward. Prall's firm received a deposit 2 days before the transfer to Rourke, $300,000. Incoming wire from an account in the name of a private security consulting company. She paused. The company's director of operations is listed in the incorporation documents. The name is Warren Briggs. Maya stood in the coffee shop with the phone against her ear and the city moving outside the window and the name Warren Briggs sitting in her chest like a piece of glass she hadn't known was there until it shifted. She didn't say anything for a moment. She let the information settle into its proper shape rather than reacting to the first shape it took, which was the shape of betrayal, which was always the least useful shape. Say it again, she said. Castillo said it again, same words, same careful voice. The company's director of operations. The name is Warren Briggs. How confident are you in the document? Maya asked. Torres ran it twice, Castillo said. The incorporation is real. The account is real. The transfer is real. The timing is real. A pause. I'm sorry, Maya. I know he's the one who sent you here. He is, Maya said. She ended the call. She stood at Holt's table with Farrow's envelope in one hand and her phone in the other, and she made herself think clearly, which required setting aside the part of her that had trusted Briggs for 4 years, had sat across from him in a diner 40 miles outside Drayfield, while he looked her in the eye and told her she was the only person he could ask. That part of her wanted to be angry. She acknowledged it, noted it, and moved it to the side. What she thought instead, a man who built an investigation into a corrupt police district and then sent an investigator into it, was not behaving like a man protecting the district. He was behaving like a man managing an outcome. The question was which outcome he'd been trying to manage, the exposure or the containment. $300,000 from Briggs's private company to Prall's firm. 2 days before Prall transferred $240,000 to Rourke. Not the same amount. The difference was $60,000, which could be a fee, could be a cut, could be any number of things. But the sequence was Briggs pays Prall pays Rourke and Rourke run a corrupt district and suppress complaints, and then Briggs sends Maya in to expose it, unless the payment wasn't for protection, unless the payment was for something else entirely. She called Castillo back. The $300,000 from Briggs to Prall, she said. What's the date? 6 weeks ago, Castillo said. And the first contact Briggs made to me about this case, the first meeting at the diner, was also 6 weeks ago, Maya said. Same week. A silence. He paid Prall and then he called you, Castillo said slowly. Walk me through what that could mean, Maya said. It could mean he was buying cooperation, Castillo said. Paying Prall to allow the investigation to proceed without interference, which would mean Prall knew the investigation was coming and had been paid to not fight it. Which would mean Rourke and Rourke didn't know, Maya said. Because if they'd known, Rourke wouldn't have behaved the way he did. You don't pour coffee on a federal investigator's head if you've been told to let the investigation happen. Right, Castillo said. So if that's the structure, Briggs pays Prall to stand down, Prall doesn't tell Rourke and Rourke. The investigation proceeds, Rourke and Rourke get exposed. Then what does Prall get out of it? Maya asked. Another silence, longer. Insulation, Castillo said. If Rourke and Rourke go down in a federal investigation, and Prall is the one who cooperated with that investigation, Prall's name doesn't appear in the initial findings. Rourke and Rourke take the full weight. Prall walks. Except Prall's shell entity is in the financial records, Maya said. which means either Briggs didn't tell him we'd find it, or Briggs didn't know we'd find it, or Briggs planned for exactly this point, Castillo said. And the question is what happens next in his plan. Maya thought about that. She thought about it hard, standing in a coffee shop at 8 in the morning, exhausted, with Pharaoh watching her from across the room. He's waiting for a call, Maya said. He's been waiting since last night. He sent me here. He knows the investigation happened. He knows Rourke and Rourke are in custody. He's waiting to hear what we found and how far it goes. What are you going to tell him? Castillo asked. Nothing yet, Maya said. Not until we have Prall's financial records in full and I understand the complete shape of what Briggs was doing. I need 2 hours. You have one, Castillo said. The regional director wants a full briefing at 10. Maya put the phone away and went back to Pharaoh's table and sat down. Pharaoh looked at her face and said, How bad? It got complicated, Maya said. The person who sent me here may have had interests I wasn't told about. Pharaoh was quiet for a moment. In my experience, she said finally, the people who build the cases and the people who run them are not always working toward the same ending. No, Maya said, they're not always. She sat with that for a moment. The coffee in front of her had gone cold. She drank it anyway. The thing about trust was that you couldn't do the work without it, and it could be used against you. Briggs had known her capabilities, had known she'd build an airtight case, had known she'd surface everything that was there to be surfaced. He'd sent her here counting on exactly that, counting on Maya Solis to do the job thoroughly enough that Rourke and Rourke went down hard, while Prall, who had been paid to cooperate, stayed out of the wreckage. A controlled demolition, clean from the outside. Profitable for the person who designed it. What he hadn't counted on was Torres finding the shell entity, or Castillo running the financial records backward far enough to find the incoming transfer, or Maya having the kind of investigator support that didn't stop at the first answer. Or maybe he'd counted on all of that and had another layer she hadn't found yet. Either way, she was done being managed. She called Torres directly. The $300,000 transfer from Briggs's company to Prall's firm, she said. I need to know if there were any prior transactions between those two accounts. Anything in the last 5 years. Torres's keyboard was already moving when she answered. Give me 8 minutes. It took 6. 4 prior transactions, Torres said, going back 3 years. Total amount across all 4, $870,000. A pause. This isn't a one-time payment, Maya. This is an ongoing arrangement. An ongoing arrangement. 3 years of payments. Which meant Briggs had been managing Prall for 3 years. Which meant whatever Prall's shell entity had been doing across multiple jurisdictions, Briggs had known about it, had been funding it or facilitating it or profiting from it, and had decided at some point in the last 6 weeks that the arrangement had become a liability that needed to be addressed by burning the bottom of the structure while protecting the top. She was the instrument he'd chosen for the burning. The specific quality of what she felt in that moment wasn't something she had a clean word for. It was anger and something that wasn't quite hurt, but lived near it. And underneath both of those, a cold, clarifying steadiness, the kind that came from being in situations where the alternative to functioning was something she'd never allowed herself. She went to Holt's table. I need you to add a name to the Federal Financial Review, she said. Warren Briggs, Deputy Chief, Drayfield City Law Enforcement Administration. I need every account connected to a private security consulting company he's listed as Director of Operations for. Holt looked at her steadily. That's going to raise flags with his office. It's going to raise flags everywhere, Maya said. Do it anyway. She called Aldridge at the regional director's office and told him in clear, direct language what Torres had found. She did not soften it. She did not preface it with qualifications or apologies, or the particular kind of hedging that people did when they were delivering information about someone they'd trusted. She gave him the facts in sequence, and then she stopped. Aldridge was quiet for 7 seconds. She counted. Briggs is the person who initiated this investigation, he said. Yes, Maya said. And his financial records suggest he had a pre-existing relationship with the man we're identifying as the architect of the network we're investigating. Yes, Maya said. Does Briggs know we've found the financial connection? Not yet, Maya said. I haven't contacted him since last night. Keep it that way, Aldridge said. I'm issuing a hold on his accounts and flagging his credentials pending review. He does not get notified through official channels. If he reaches out to you, he will, Maya said. He'll be expecting an update. Then give him one, Aldridge said carefully. General, nothing about the financial records. Can you do that? Maya thought about it. Could she talk to Warren Briggs and give him a partial truth? Could she manage that conversation without letting him read her? She'd spent 9 days in a police station managing every conversation with a version of herself she'd constructed for the purpose. She could manage one more. Yes, she said. Briggs called at 9:42 before she had to call him. His voice was even and professional, the voice of a deputy chief receiving a case update, and she matched it without effort. The overnight operation was successful, she said. Rourke and Rourke are both in federal custody pending the formal hearing. We have documentary evidence on the complaint suppression, the camera interference, and the web medical file modification. The case is solid. Good, Briggs said. Maya, that's really good work. Thank you, she said. There are still some financial threads being reviewed. It may take a few more days before we have the full picture. A small pause. Too small to mean anything unless you were listening for it. Financial threads? The web civil settlement, Maya said, tracing the source of the payout, standard procedure for a case like this. Right, Briggs said. Of course. Another beat. How much longer do you need in Drayfield? I'm not sure yet, she said. I'll update you when I know more. She ended the call and sat with her phone in her hand for a moment. The pause before financial threads had been half a second, long enough to mean he'd heard something in that phrase that had registered. He'd know soon that the net was wider than he'd expected. What he did with that knowledge in the next few hours would tell her everything she needed to know about what he'd actually intended and how much he understood about where he now stood. The 10 o'clock briefing with Aldridge was attended by Castillo, Torres, Holt, and 2 people from the regional director's office, whose names Maya noted and filed. Aldridge ran the briefing with the organized efficiency of someone who'd taken a complicated situation and reduced it to its essential structure. He presented the 3-tier network: Rourke as operational, Rourke as internal command protection, Prawl as external financial architecture. He presented the Briggs connection as a 4th tier, still under active financial review, with no conclusions drawn yet. Then he turned to Maya and said, You built this case in 9 days under partial cover with an escalating interference environment and a compromised chain of command. I want that noted for the record. The people inside the building built it, Maya said. I just gave them somewhere to put it. Aldridge looked at her with the slight expression of someone who recognized that this was genuine rather than modest. Both things can be true, he said. The formal hearing for Rourke and Rourke was held 11 days later in the federal courthouse on Drayfield's west side. Maya sat at the evidentiary table with Castillo on one side and the case file in front of her, and she watched the proceedings with the contained attention of someone who had spent weeks building something and was now watching it hold its own weight. Rourke's attorney argued that the misconduct was isolated, that the complaint suppression reflected institutional habit rather than deliberate wrongdoing, that the camera closure had been an administrative error. The panel listened to this for 40 minutes and then spent 3 hours reviewing the documentary evidence. The documentary evidence did not support the attorney's argument. The panel found Rourke in violation of 11 specific conduct standards, including deliberate obstruction of internal complaints, workplace harassment, and falsification of documentation. His termination was effective immediately, his pension review initiated, and his case forwarded to the state attorney's office for criminal proceedings on the obstruction counts. Rourke's hearing was separate and took longer. His attorney was better. His defenses were more technically constructed. He had years of practice presenting himself as an administrator operating within institutional norms, and that performance was still largely intact when the medical file modification entered the record. The modification log was 3 pages. The keycard access log was 1 page. Together they placed Rourke at his terminal, with his credentials, in a 2-minute window making changes to Marcus Webb's medical record before submitting it as evidence in an official proceeding. His attorney said, My client maintains that the access logs reflect a routine review rather than deliberate modification. The panel chair looked at the document metadata, which showed the injury descriptions changed from specific clinical language to vague nonspecific language in a single edit, and said, The modification appears to have altered the clinical specificity of the findings. Can you explain how a routine review would produce that particular change? The attorney could not, satisfactorily. Rourke was found in violation of 14 conduct standards, including evidence falsification in a criminal proceeding. His termination was effective immediately. Criminal charges were referred to the federal prosecutor's office. His pension was frozen pending the criminal review. He left the courthouse with his attorney and no public statement, which was noted by the three journalists outside because his attorney had told them he would speak, and then he didn't. Leonard Prawl was a different and longer process. He had 17 years of separation from the department, a functioning law practice, and lawyers who were paid to create friction at every procedural step. The financial subpoena took 10 days to fully execute. The shell entity records required a separate filing. Each delay was legitimate by the technical standards of the law, which was how good attorneys worked and which was something Maya had learned to accept as part of the process rather than a failure of it. But the records came. They always came, eventually, when the request was backed by federal authority and a financial trail that ran through 6 settlements across 3 jurisdictions. The pattern was too broad to obscure and too documented to explain away, and when the full record landed in front of the federal prosecutor's office, it was accompanied by Torres's timeline analysis showing 4 years of payments between Prawl's firm and Briggs's consulting company. Leonard Prawl was indicted on 12 counts, including operating a covert settlement network designed to suppress civil complaints against law enforcement, conspiracy to obstruct justice, and financial fraud. He surrendered to federal authorities on a Wednesday morning and said nothing to the press except that he looked forward to clearing his name, which was the thing people said when they did not expect to clear their name. Briggs's situation was more complicated and also, in some ways, more clarifying. His financial records, when fully pulled, showed that his arrangement with Prawl had begun as something that looked like consulting, legitimate payments for what was described in the records as liability risk assessment. The payments had grown over 3 years. At some point, the exact point was debated by the prosecutors, who cared about intent and timing, the arrangement had shifted from consulting to active participation in the settlement network. Briggs had known what Prawl's shell entity was doing. He had continued the payments. He had then, 6 weeks before contacting Maya, made a final large transfer that Prawl later used to compensate Rourke, and then sent Maya into the investigation. Whether this made Briggs a man who had tried to undo his own complicity by exposing it, or a man who had tried to manage his complicity by controlling what the exposure revealed, was something that the federal prosecutors spent considerable time arguing about. Maya gave her statement to the prosecutors on a Thursday morning. She told them what she knew and when she'd known it and how she'd found each piece. She told them about the diner meeting, the file, the 9 days. She told them about the phone call where Briggs said, "Are you okay?" She told them she had believed he was acting with institutional integrity until the financial records showed otherwise. She did not editorialize. She gave them the facts. What she thought privately, afterward, walking out of the federal building into the pale afternoon, was that Briggs had probably told himself a story. Most people who did things like this told themselves a story in which their version of managing a bad situation was actually better than letting the bad situation manage itself. A story in which controlling the outcome was a form of service rather than a form of self-protection. People were very good at those stories. She'd seen it in every broken institution she'd ever worked inside. The self-justification was always present and always coherent from inside the person telling it. That didn't make the thing justified. It just made the person comprehensible. Briggs was suspended pending a full criminal review. His credentials were pulled. He would, in all probability, face charges on the lower end of the conspiracy counts. Less than Prawl, significantly less than Rourke, but real, documented, and public. Which was the appropriate proportionality of it, she thought. He had done less harm than the others. He had also, whatever his motivations, set in motion the events that ended their operation. The law would weigh both of those things. That was what the law was for. Marcus Webb was contacted by a victim's advocate from the federal prosecutor's office on a Tuesday morning. He sat with the advocate for 2 hours and then gave a voluntary statement about what had happened to him 3 years ago. The arrest, the force used during it, the way his injuries had been described to him by the treating physician, and then reappeared in official documents as something milder and less specific. He'd known something was wrong with those records. He'd known the settlement amount was too clean and too fast. He'd taken it because he needed the money and because he hadn't believed at the time that there was anyone on the right side of this who would listen. He submitted to a re-examination of his injuries by an independent medical examiner, whose report corroborated the original treating physician's notes rather than the altered record. That report became part of the evidentiary record in Rourke's criminal case. Webb didn't say much to the press. He gave a single statement through the advocate's office that was 7 sentences long. The sentence that made it into every news report was the 5th one. I filed a report because I knew what happened to me, and then I watched it disappear, and I spent 3 years believing that was just how things worked. He didn't say what had changed his mind about that. He didn't need to. Officer Reyes had been, as Maya had assessed, someone the network had used rather than someone who had been a willing participant. Her settlement, filed 8 months ago after a harassment incident involving Tarrant, had been processed through Prall's shell entity without her full understanding of where the money came from or what the confidentiality terms would actually mean in practice. When she was brought in for a witness interview, she told everything she knew, which was more than she'd realized she knew, and which included a conversation she'd had with Tarrant 6 weeks before Maya arrived. A conversation in which Tarrant had told her, obliquely but clearly enough, that if she said anything about the harassment settlement, she would have problems she wasn't currently having. That conversation became part of Tarrant's disciplinary record. He was terminated the same week as Rourke, with his own set of conduct violations appended to the formal record. Priya Mehta's formal statement, given to Torres on the night of the initial operation, was cited 4 times in the panel's findings against Rourke. She was in the building when the findings were announced. She'd been asked to be available for procedural questions. And she heard about it from Graves, who told her in the hallway outside the briefing room with the straightforward manner of a man who understood the value of clear information delivered without theater. She didn't cry. She went into the women's bathroom and ran cold water over her wrists for 90 seconds, which was something she'd started doing during her first year on the job. When the stress accumulated past a threshold, her body registered before her mind did, and then she went back out into the hallway and kept working. She told Maya about the bathroom later, in a conversation they had over coffee in the break room. The real break room, not the repurposed one that had been the wellness suite. She told it matter-of-factly, without drama, as the kind of detail you shared with someone you'd decided to trust. Maya listened and didn't offer anything that would have been easier to hear than it was honest to say. "You kept the records," Maya said. "For how long before you thought anyone would actually use them?" Priya thought about it. "I don't know if I thought that exactly," she said. "I think I kept them because keeping them was the only thing I could do that still felt like I was doing something, like I hadn't completely given up." Maya nodded slowly. "That's not a small thing," she said. "People think documentation is passive. It's not. It's the decision to maintain a record of the truth, even when the truth has nowhere to go yet." Priya looked at her. "Did it go where it needed to?" "Yes," Maya said. Gwen McCready was formally recognized in the panel's findings as a civilian employee who had been subjected to supervisory pressure inconsistent with departmental standards, and who had maintained accurate records of the incident under that pressure. The recognition was procedural, written in the particular language of official findings, but it was there and it was permanent. She received a formal apology from the interim district commander, Lieutenant Graves, who had been elevated to acting commander pending the appointment of permanent leadership. The apology was delivered in writing and in person in his office, with the door open. She accepted it without performing graciousness she didn't feel, which Maya heard about secondhand and respected entirely. Doss gave his statement and was transferred to a different district at his own request, which was processed without friction under the witness protection protocols. He started over in a place where nobody knew his history, which was both harder and cleaner than staying. He sent Maya a message 6 weeks later that said only, "The person you talked about, Pharaoh. She protected me when she didn't have to. I want you to know I think about that." Maya wrote back, "So does she." Denise Farrow's formal reinstatement was recommended by the Federal Review Panel as part of the findings. On the grounds that her original complaint had been valid, her administrative leave had been retaliatory, and the subsequent damage to her career record required correction. The reinstatement process itself took longer than the recommendation, because institutional processes always took longer than the people inside them wanted, and because correcting something after the fact was structurally harder than not breaking it in the first place. But it happened. On a Thursday morning, 5 weeks after the initial overnight operation, Farrow walked back into a police department building. Not the 9th District, a different facility, one she'd chosen, in a city she'd moved to during her 2 years away, with her rank restored and her record corrected and the 2 years subtracted from the wrong column in the accounting of her career. She and Maya had spoken 3 times since the coffee shop. The conversations were not long. They were the conversations of two people who had done something significant together and were now finding out who they were to each other outside of the urgency of it. It was a different kind of knowing. It took longer. Maya thought it was probably more real. The formal review of the 9th District's operational structure took 4 months and produced a 47-page report that recommended systemic changes to complaint processing, surveillance maintenance oversight, HR access controls, and the supervisory approval chain for internal investigations. Every recommendation was adopted, which was not always the outcome of such reports, and the adoption was monitored by a federal oversight contact who would remain in place for 18 months to verify implementation. Maya wrote 3 pages of those recommendations herself, at Aldridge's request, specifically the sections on early intervention protocols for workplace harassment in law enforcement settings. She wrote them in the plain language she'd been trained to use for operational documents, clear, unambiguous, designed to be understood by the people who would have to implement them rather than the people who would review them from a distance. She was good at plain language. She'd always preferred it to the alternatives. The piece that didn't get resolved cleanly was Briggs. His prosecution was ongoing when Maya left Drayfield, and it would be ongoing for some time after that, moving through the particular slowness of complex financial cases where intent was contested and attorneys were thorough. She checked in on it periodically. She would check on it for a long time. Not because she needed a resolution before she could move forward, but because the case was a case and cases deserved to be followed to their complete conclusion. She had one conversation with Briggs before his credentials were pulled, which she had not expected and which happened because he called her at 7 in the morning on a day when she was packing her rented room in Drayfield and had not yet gotten a cup of coffee. She answered it. "You found the transfers," he said. No preamble, no "how are you," just that. "Yes," she said. "I want you to know—" He stopped, started again. "It wasn't what it looks like." "Then tell me what it was," Maya said. A long pause. She folded a shirt and waited. "I knew what Prawl had built," Briggs said. "I'd known for 3 years. I found out, and I was in it by then. Not the same way they were. I wasn't in the district. I wasn't suppressing anything directly. But I'd paid him for risk assessments, and he'd use that money for the shell entity, and I'd look the other way because it was convenient, and because I told myself it wasn't my department, it wasn't my mess." Maya stopped folding. "And then the Faro audit came to my office," he said, "the federal flag. And I knew it was going to lead somewhere, and I had a choice to either let it lead there on its own, which was going to include my name eventually, or to get in front of it." He paused again. "I chose you because I knew you'd do it completely. I told myself it would be cleaner if you were the one who exposed it, because you'd do it right." "And you hoped I wouldn't find the transfers," Maya said. Silence. "You hoped I'd expose Rourke and Wark and stop there," she said, "because that would be enough to look like accountability without going all the way to Prawl. And if Prawl didn't go down, your name stayed out of it." "I don't know," he said. "I don't know exactly what I thought was going to happen." Maya believed that. She believed he'd told himself a story that was internally consistent enough that he hadn't examined it closely, because that was the way people managed to do things that they knew, on some level, were wrong. You didn't examine the story. You just told it. "I'm sorry," he said, "for what it's worth." "It's worth something," she said. "Not as much as you probably want it to be." She ended the call. She picked up the folded shirt and put it in her bag and finished packing. She left Drayfield on a Thursday. She drove the route she'd taken 11 times in the past 5 weeks, past the coffee shop where she'd met Faro, past the gas station Doss had mentioned, past the intersection where she'd read Gwen's forward text at a red light. The city looked ordinary from a car window. Cities always did. The things that happened inside their buildings were invisible from the street. She thought about that. She thought about how much happened inside places that nobody outside them could see, and how the people inside them often couldn't see it clearly, either because they were too close to the shape of it, too deep in the daily texture of it, too accustomed to the thing to notice what it had done to the air around it. It took someone willing to go in without rank and without an introduction and without the protection of an official role, someone willing to be poured on, laughed at, dismissed, reduced to a name on a contractor badge, to see it clearly. She hadn't done that because she was fearless. She'd done it because she understood that fear and function were not opposites and never had been. She'd been afraid during parts of this. She'd made mistakes. She'd misjudged Rourke's speed, underestimated the Briggs connection, moved on Gwen without enough cover. She'd done the work anyway because the alternative was not the work. And not doing the work meant that Priya kept carrying her envelope alone, and Farrow kept waiting for a phone call that didn't come, and Marcus Webb kept believing that the disappearance of his injuries on paper was just how things worked. She stopped at the last intersection before the highway entrance and waited for the light. She thought about what Priya had said in the break room. I kept the records because keeping them was the only thing I could do that still felt like I was doing something. And she thought about how most people, when they found themselves in the middle of systems that were larger than they were, and more entrenched than they'd realized and more defended than seemed survivable, made one of two choices. They went quiet and stayed quiet and learned to live with the weight of that. Or they kept records, kept notes, kept copies. Did the one thing they could still do that was true, even when they didn't know if it would ever go anywhere. And sometimes, eventually, it went somewhere. The light changed. Maya drove. She had been offered a permanent position in the regional director's office, which would mean oversight work across multiple jurisdictions, which would mean more cases like this one, which would mean going into more broken systems and seeing them clearly and helping the people inside them find a way to say what they hadn't been able to say. Aldridge had made the offer carefully, without pressure, on her last day in the federal building. She'd said she needed a week to think about it. What she'd actually needed was the drive. The specific clarifying quality of moving through the world with no task in front of her except going from one place to another and watching the geography change outside the window. She'd learned years ago, in a different kind of field operation, that decisions made under sustained pressure were decisions made from inside the pressure rather than from a position of actual clarity. You had to put distance between yourself and the thing before you could see it in proportion. She saw it now. The work was the work she was built for, not because she was exceptional, though she was capable, but because she had the specific combination of patience and steadiness and willingness to be underestimated that the work required. Not everyone could walk into a room as nobody and stay nobody long enough to see the room clearly. She could. She'd been doing it in various forms for 15 years. She understood the value of it in a way that went past professional investment. She took the highway entrance and accelerated into the morning. She called Aldridge from the car, hands-free, 70 miles outside Drayfield, with the city no longer visible in her mirrors. "I'll take the position," she said. "Good," Aldridge said, in the tone of someone who hadn't doubted the outcome but had respected the process of reaching it. "I'll have the paperwork ready when you're back." She drove another 50 miles before she stopped for coffee at a gas station off the highway. Standing at a counter that smelled like burned grounds and paying with cash, and looking out at the parking lot and the highway beyond it, and the flatland stretching out in every direction under a sky that had committed, finally, to being fully morning. She thought about the scrubs folded at the bottom of her bag, the lanyard, the contractor badge with the name she'd used for 9 days. She'd kept them, which surprised her a little when she realized it. Not as trophies, not as proof of anything, just as objects that marked the beginning of something, the way you kept a photograph not because the photograph was the thing, but because it was the point where the thing began to be visible. The coffee was bad. She drank it anyway. Outside, the light was flat and clear and indifferent in the way of early morning light everywhere. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just present. A truck pulled out of the lot. A bird went across the sky on a line it had picked for its own reasons. Someone came out of the gas station with a bag of chips and a look of moderate contentment. The world was full of people carrying things they hadn't been able to put down yet, afraid to file reports that would disappear, afraid to say what they'd seen because the last person who said it ended up on leave, keeping records in envelopes, sending forward texts from parking lots, walking through doors that nobody had thought to hold open for them. She had walked through one of those doors in a pair of plain scrubs, and somebody had poured coffee on her, and she had written down a badge number with steady hands. And from that small, ridiculous human moment, the entire thing had unspooled into its full shape and been held in the light long enough to be real. That was not a story about one exceptional person bringing down a corrupt system. That was a story about what happened when enough people, the frightened ones, the careful ones, the ones who'd kept records for years without knowing who would ever read them, were finally given somewhere to put what they'd been holding. She had been that somewhere. She could be it again. Maya finished the bad coffee, put the cup in the trash, walked back to her car, and got in. She had a drive ahead of her and work waiting at the end of it, and a life that was, in most of the ways that mattered, her own. She was not someone who had been saved or redeemed or transformed by what had happened in Drayfield. She was someone who had gone into a hard place and done hard work, and come out the other side of it changed in the small, specific, cumulative ways that hard work produced. A little less willing to accept a comfortable explanation, a little more attentive to the person in the room who wasn't speaking, a little more certain that the most important thing you could carry into any situation was the willingness to see it clearly, even when clarity cost you something. She started the car. Nobody pours coffee on you unless they believe the cost of doing it is zero. The lesson she'd learned, not in Drayfield, but confirmed there, confirmed in the specific and irreducible texture of it, was that the most dangerous thing a dismissed person could do was stay quiet. Not because silence was cowardly. Sometimes silence was the only available survival strategy, and survival mattered. But when the moment came, when the conditions aligned, when someone finally walked into the room who would write down the badge number and mean it, that was the moment to stop being invisible. She had been that person for other people. She planned to keep being it. The highway opened ahead of her, long and straight and fully lit, and she drove into the morning without looking back.